Good evening. This is the Board of Health meeting of September 17th, 2014, being 7:30. We're starting the meeting. I will read the agenda. We have several meeting minutes that are not yet available for approval, so we won't be doing any of those. At 8 o'clock, we have a variance hearing for 35 Stony Brook Road, and at 8:30, we have a public hearing on proposed regulation changes for both sewer and water. Unscheduled items, chairman's business, not appointments. We're going to be continuing discussion of putting together a request for proposal for professional services. We have to plan for that. Agent's business, we have Simji's Rustic Pizza transfer for a food establishment permit, and 138 Farm Road Brewster, an additional discussion for an additional well. Mark, do you have anything that came up in the last 48 hours that needs approval?
Not that I know.
Okay, nothing unexpected. Under other business, we have notice, we'll give notice of the Board of Health flu clinic dates, review of ZBA petition for a hearing they're having tomorrow night. We'll accept receipt of water analysis reports for Whitney Farm monitoring wells. Discuss the Massachusetts Association of Health Board certification program, programs being given in Taunton and Marlborough. Discuss the MHOA annual conference from the 22nd of, what is that, 22nd of October to the 24th of October. Any new agenda items for October 1st meeting, which is the next scheduled meeting of the Board of Health, except for the 2 executive sessions, which there will be no public parts of those meetings. And any items reasonably not anticipated by the chair 48 hours in advance, of which there are none tonight. What was that about? Okay.
Wanted my mic
Okay.
pointing at me
All
at all
right.
times.
So, the first scheduled item is 8 o'clock, and so until 8 o'clock, we will be discussing unscheduled business. And, well, let's talk about the flu clinic dates, Ellen.
Okay, I gave you a handout. Monday,
On the mic.
Monday, October 6th, and Wednesday, October 29th. The first clinic is typically seniors, but it's any adults. The second clinic in the evening at St. Teresa's is for all ages 3 and up.
Okay. Very good. I will point out, I have already signed up for my shot on the 6th. And so I urge all seniors to do that, most particularly seniors, but anybody requiring a shot.
So in the past, there were limitations at times, and who could come, but not this year?
Excuse me?
In the past, there were limitations
Yeah, no.
of who could come, none this year?
No.
Okay. And the reason that the 3 years and up is on the second session is because you need someone special to administer?
Right. The VNA nurses do the first clinic, and they are not licensed to vaccinate children.
Okay.
Chris, you had something to add?
I'll be there helping on Wednesday, the 29th, 6 to 8
And
p.m.
I-
at St. Teresa's.
And I will be helping on the 6th.
Okay.
So the board is represented. Okay, ZBA petition for hearing. It's a renewal of a permit, and I can't believe that the board has any interest or comment on it, but let me get to it. Petition of Marna Orcutt for the renewal of a special permit to operate the Sherborn Day Spa with signage at 24 North Main. This is an ongoing operation. We've permitted it when it was new. I don't believe we have any comment for their renewal.
No, I
None?
don't see any
Mark,
issues with the sign.
Any issues? Okay, Ellen, would you please just communicate to ZBA that we have no comment? We have reviewed it and have no comment, so they know that we at least saw it. Note, receipt of Whitney Farm monitoring well analysis report. These are 2 wells, one shallow, one deep, at the Whitney Farms project on Whitney Street, which have been installed prior to any work on that project. Between the project location and the Cadillac paint site in Ashland, looking for expansion of any contamination coming from that plume. These are routinely tested wells, as I should say, one shallow, one deep. We have their reports, and providentially, both reports show absolutely no contamination.
None detected.
None detected within the limits of the testing. Thank you. Which is pretty rigorous. Does the board have any comments on that report?
No.
You've reviewed it?
Yes.
Okay. Note MAHB certification program. Ellen, you want to elaborate on that, or Chris?
Well, last year, I think all three of you went.
We did.
If you choose to go again, the Region 4A grant funds will pay for your registration, so it won't cost the town
And our
anything
certification only lasts a
per
year?
year. It's a certificate, yes.
I have trouble making a commitment that far in advance for the Marlborough site, which is the one I'd go to, so would you remind me again?
Okay, because I'll need to,
When do you have to sign us up?
well, as soon as possible, but when would you
I'm already
say?
signed up for the first in Taunton, and I've already been covered on the fee, so I'm all
Okay,
set.
so you're all
Okay,
set.
and what dates would you
They're
need to know by?
Saturday. I would say,
What's that?
how soon
How
does?
soon do you have to know?
Marcia
She's
wants to know.
accepting registrations at MHB now.
Yeah.
She just opened it up a few days ago.
Yeah, but
When does
she,
it shut
I'm
off?
inclined to go to the Marlboro just
Yeah.
for convenience,
Yeah.
and I'll hope that that date works out, and I'll
okay,
save it.
so I can
And
sign
that's
up.
typically what, 9 to 1, 9 to 2?
It's 9 to 4.
9 to 4?
yeah.
Oh, it is the whole day, okay.
The last lecture at either spot is Mike Hugo from the Framingham Board of Health, talking about site assignments
Yeah.
and public and boards of health involvement in PIPs, public involvement, and getting very involved in cleanups, so that
Okay,
would be a
why
good
don't you sign me up?
lecture.
I will say if I sign you up and pay for it using the grant funds, you have to, you go to 51% of the emergency preparedness track. But,
And would that mean
Sure.
missing?
no, because you could do it, the emergency preparedness in the morning
Oh,
if
all
that's
right.
in the afternoon, go to that one in the afternoon.
Okay, well, why don't you sign me up on that? And
And
I'll
Darryl
just make a
too,
note
and-
closer to the date.
Now, I typically go as well, is that okay?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay with
Yes,
that?
it's the same tract,
Yeah,
three separate tracks, but it's
Right.
identical for either day, so.
okay.
And do you think if we pay and I need to switch to the first for some reason, that would be
You're covered.
workable?
If you pay,
yeah,
you're
if you
covered.
could
Oh,
go.
all right.
Yeah,
Okay.
you just let me know and I'll let me know.
You'll have to write your own name tag if it's not
Okay.
paid. Not a big deal.
Okay. MHOA Annual Conference, which is a different animal.
Right, and that's the one that I typically go to each year. It would mean being out of the office on Wednesday and Thursday. Again, it doesn't cost the town anything, the Region 4A, as long as I go to 51% of the emergency preparedness track, they pay.
This is part of that?
Yeah.
Part of the emergency preparedness track?
They have they have food safety, public health and nursing, emergency preparedness, and on-site wastewater environmental tracks. So as you can pick and choose which class you take all day long, but
Would
as
you
long
just,
as,
okay, would you repeat this for the next meeting's agenda? Because I have some concerns about you're losing office time given some of this strain
Okay.
we're under. Okay?
One thing I would say is
And
it's
I don't
not
wanna talk-
identical tracks of emergency preparedness.
Identical to,
It's not identical to the MAHB.
yeah.
oh, right, yeah, I recognize, I appreciate that.
Right, and there is some issue of continuous learning versus our short-term
Well, it's not only
immediate
that,
needs,
it's
so I'd like to,
Continuous participation, you know, to stay in the loop so that we continue to get the funds for the town and the equipment.
Does that jeopardize our participation if you didn't go?
I don't think this isn't part of the emergency preparedness program, but the classes are beneficial, but it's up to you.
Board have any problem that we repeat discussion of this at the next meeting?
No, that'd be fine.
Want to get more
Is that
background
enough
on it.
time for planning for this meeting? Wait a minute, October 20,
Oh, well, yeah, it would be October 1st, and this is the 22nd. Do you have to know by, how soon do you
Well,
have to know?
the sooner you pay, the cheaper it is. So
Since somebody else
after
is paying, we
September.
don't have to worry, do we?
Except you lose that grant funds, you'll have more if we pay less.
I'll
But-
risk it. Okay. Thank you.
Well, it will
is it
cost more.
significant? Are we talking
I don't have
a
the
hefty
cost right
percent
here.
or?
I don't have the,
Okay.
it might be $50 to $100 more.
Okay.
How much is the cost overall? That's the
It's
differential.
700 maybe? It's 2 nights at the hotel
At a hotel?
Yeah.
Where are you going?
on the Cape,
They're either Western Mass or the Cape, they
Whoa.
vary.
in
yeah.
Springfield.
Okay, again,
In the past, or the Cape.
I don't feel I had enough background to discuss this tonight. It just hit
Okay.
the agenda, so why don't we talk about it again on October 1st, okay?
Okay. Yep.
Thank you.
I'll put that on.
Mark, would you like to knock off some of your business?
Yes.
Sorry.
Well, that's okay. 138 Farm Road, we had a request for a well on the property. I do have the plan.
Is anybody here from 138 Farm Road, or for that item? Okay. Well, anybody that wants to is welcome to come up and look at the plan if you're interested.
So what they're doing is they're placing a well. If you look at this is a good plan to look at, is the locust plan. And here's Farm Pond, here's Farm Road, South Street. And what they're doing, they're placing the new well right there. They have other wells on the property, but they wish to have a secondary well. It's a large property. Acreage, it's 389,000 square feet. The well has been addressed by the engineer as it relates to abutters, and because we found the soil out there is very permeable, you have to increase the distance by 25 feet, and so the engineer did address that as it relates to distances up to 175 feet from any upgrading and proposed private, vice versa. It's 175 from any upgrading and septic system. So in that,
recommending approval?
I recommend approval.
Do I have a motion to approve well application for 138 Farm Road based on the engineer's planned application, the agent's recommendation?
So moved.
I'll second that.
Moved and second. Is there any further discussion? Thank you. That probably will help a little, but won't make it go away, Susan. Thank you. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay. And food establishment, Mark.
Rustic Pizza is the location. The owners of Rustic Pizza are actually the operators as well. And at this point, they prefer to lease the facility out to a company named Simji's Rustic Pizza. So it has a new operator who is a certified food manager. They are also utilizing the on-site certified food manager, plus they have a third certified food manager. I was very impressed by the fact that they have a well-trained staff. I went through the facility. I did find a couple things that need to be corrected. I explained, that the board would be meeting to approve the permit, and I would ask that it be conditional to, there was one issue about if they're going to keep the pizza for display out front, it can only be kept there for an hour per state code, but also it needs to be protected from sneezing, hair, and so forth. And it's a very easy fix. I gave them some ideas. And then the other one was their vent, which is for over the fryer-laters and stoves, need to be serviced. It's a fire department code, but we oversee the same code for the fire department. So they were going to take care of those two issues, but I would recommend approval conditional to those two issues.
And the transfer fee has been paid, Ellen?
Yes.
Okay, so we have a motion to approve the permit transfer subject to the agent's satisfaction with the corrections to be made.
And I would ask that, if I may, to that motion, is I would ask them, the permit to come to me, and then I'll hand it to them. based on the changes.
Yeah, that the permit be approved, but withheld until the corrections are made to the agent's satisfaction.
Thank you.
So moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Is there any further discussion?
No.
Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. It's approved. Okay, the only other unscheduled item we have on the agenda is discussion of the RFP for professional services. And we began a discussion of that at the last meeting. I expect we'll continue it at the next meeting, but I think we have to get to a framework on what we're going to do with that. So I ask the other board members if they have any thoughts on the matter.
At the moment, I'm thinking that we have a contract now that we can use somewhat as a template. We can use the town administrator as a resource for crafting an RFP. I don't know how difficult it would be to get RFP examples from other towns. That might be illuminating in some way. And there is a distinction too, I guess there are a few tracks that you can take with an RFP, either for combined, and I'm not sure the exact terminology, but combined price and then qualifications, or you can separate those two so that you can evaluate them independently, so.
Okay, I gather you're talking about the process whereby you evaluate the qualifications without knowing the price.
Right.
And then make a secondary determination. Yeah, I think David, the town administrator, chief procurement officer, could probably give us guidance on that. I was equally interested, and I agree with you, I think we should talk to some other towns and see if we can see how they proceeded. But I think we came close to a decision that we would be looking at an hourly rate contract, and we'd be looking at having proposals for health agent services and food inspection services, that we'd be having those two separate contracts asked for, plus a merged contract. We're in agreement on that, right?
Sure.
Okay.
Either way.
And so we dispensed with the retainer concept and everything else, and so we're pretty much focused on that. That said, I think we have a burden to tell the applicants, give them some idea of the volume of work.
And that's what I was thinking too, that
Yeah.
we, by reviewing, example workloads over the years, we could see just the ups and downs on workload or mix of activities and how variable that is.
And I think that's going to make a little bit more work for Ellen to put that together, to see if we can't spot, unless we can just use annual reports, but are the annual reports comprehensive enough to describe the volume of work?
It gives numbers.
Yeah.
It-
But I mean, it misses re-inspections, it doesn't capture every food, it doesn't capture temporary food inspections for temporary events and so forth.
It doesn't, it doesn't include the numbers of inspections at all.
Is we'll want to state what the state requirements are, and then state what actually happened above and beyond for re-inspections, to give a sense for whoever is applying how much work there is.
Yeah. I think that's going to be the real challenge here, is giving the people quoting a basis to quote. Again, speaking to the volume of the work, so.
There may be a comment.
Did you just say the annual report does not include the number of inspections?
No, it does include the number of
I thought you
inspections.
said it does not.
Not the number of food inspections, no.
It
Doesn't
Why
include
would
the
you have an
number
annual
of
report if you
septic,
don't include the number of inspections?
the number of permits it includes, but not the number of inspections. Never has,
Okay. So it's
And
not
the-
a report on inspections, it's a report on.
on permits.
It's a report on permits and the number of food establishments in town and so forth. But there's a whole there's fair volume of work that goes on the board that is of how do I put it? It's an unscheduled, unexpected basis. For instance, temporary food establishments for an affair.
That annual report is common amongst other towns.
Pardon me?
That would be common amongst other towns.
Yeah, it's a
So you're
fairly,
not telling the people in the RFQ anything they shouldn't already know. They should be familiar with how those numbers are. You just
Yeah.
put them in the annual report.
right. I'm
It's an
looking,
industry standard, right?
the annual report is not an industry standard. Everybody writes their own annual report. The reporting to the state is a standard
That's what I
for
mean.
this, that, and the other thing. Yeah, there are different reports that go to the state. That's different from the annual report. So we're going to have to work on exactly, what the volume of work is, and then how that relates to the state requirements vis-à-vis food inspections, but other items.
Is this something that we envision trying to pull together information and sitting here and going through it and editing, or?
No, this is something we're going to have to ask the staff to assemble, and we'll look it over when we have time and discuss it in a meeting among ourselves. But no, it's got to be something that it's a, I wouldn't call it, it's an administrative function to pull this information together for the RFP. I think what I'm trying to demonstrate is that this RFP process is not a simple process, and
No.
it's going to take a while to put it together, and we're going to go at it as quickly as we can.
How many years should we go back? 2 or 3? Get an average?
I think at least 2. I think the last, if we can get 2 fiscal years, 2 full fiscal years, I think we'll get a fairly good record. If there's if it's showing a huge trend, we'll have to make some assumptions.
I'm wondering if it'd be worth trying to pick a year in the past that had some interesting characteristic. Times of feast or famine, or something that may have affected the
Extreme
distribution of
heat.
work.
Well,
Just
extreme heat for food inspections or something
Right.
like that.
something that might capture the outer bounds of what might happen.
Just so the board knows, I was kind of informed it's best that I don't participate, since I may be one of your
Right.
people. So I wish I could help you, but I want to stay clear.
Right. No,
Of any
if you're
potential
going to be responding to this RFP, you shouldn't have any business in the
Just so the board
formulation of
knows.
it. You're right.
I'm not being in any way quiet on it. I just want to make that point.
Ellen, do you recall a particular year in the last 3
Well,
years that was
just- was
busier
it-
than?
A year ago, when there was the hurricane and the ice storm in October, that was and I know the food establishments lost power.
That would be a good year to look at.
Yeah.
Okay.
Any other aspects of the RFP that we want to see if we can nail down? I guess, there are a couple things that I think of. One is, once we get it together, where do we go with it? In other words, what venues do we use to solicit responses? And I know there are several through the MAHB.
There's
Certainly
one, sure.
for sure. I'm not sure that wouldn't be seen more by other existing agents, and I'm told that there are some companies out there that would be willing to respond to something like this, but I have no experience with that. So I would wonder how we reach them also. And I'll probably ask David Williams what different avenues he has that he knows of, that he's used in the past, and so forth. But
Right. He indicated that he certainly does have avenues.
yeah. Just making notes here. So, okay, it's 5 minutes of 8. I'm going to I expect all that people might be interested in variance hearing at 35 Stony Brook Road probably are here already, but I wanted to take the time just before that hearing date time to explain the process that we use on a variance hearing. It's a process that we use to make sure that everybody's heard and that all the information gets out there, that the project is first, the engineer is asked to come forward to present the project. And the engineer is then asked to explain to the board the overarching circumstances that require the variance. The variances are places where this system wouldn't be able to meet the Sherborn Board of Health regulations, and yet, because it's an existing house and it would be a hardship to deny a system, the board is given the authority to grant variances for an existing property that cannot get a septic system on the property so that they can still continue to use the house. The state clearly considers it a hardship. If you don't give them a septic system, you've basically condemned their property and taken any use of it away, which you can't do. So on that basis, the Board of Health is given authority to grant variances to their own regulations. We may also grant variances to a limited number of state regulations, and are further appeals for variances to state regulations that have to go through both us and the state. That's not the case in this application, but in general, there are several levels of variances that can be granted. The process that we follow, as I say, is we ask the engineer to present the plan and the circumstances that keep them from meeting the regulations, and then to enumerate the variances that are going to be requested for that system. Following that, the board discusses the variances. The agent is asked for his opinion, and at that point, most all the technical information about the plan and the variances are known, and at that point, we ask any public that have questions about it to raise their questions and have their questions responded to. What this does is assures an orderly fashion that if you have questions, they may well be answered through the technical presentation, and you may not have questions left by the time we get to the public comment. But if you still do, we will be willing to respond to those until everybody's comments have been heard and responded to. So it's a process we use that's proven well in the past, that everybody gets their say, but it's in an orderly manner, and it's at a particular time that basically makes it a fairly compact process. To that end, I guess technically I have to wait 3 more minutes to start this variance hearing. But I could ask you, how many people here are here for interest in the 35 Stony Brook Road septic system plan? Simply the engineer and the applicant. Okay, I gather everybody else is here for the 8:30 hearing. We find ourselves with no other business other than that variance hearing and the regulation hearing to come. So why don't, yeah, we're close enough. Part of the variance hearing is that the applicant is required to notify all legal abutters to the property and receive notification that all those abutters have received a notice and have responded to it, so that anyone abutting the property knows that there's a hearing, that there are variances that may be granted and can come for comment. In fact, I see about a abutter who just entered. So good that we didn't start too soon. The proof of the butter notification are green cards coming back in the mail, so I will ask Ellen to have all the green cards or notice of mailings.
Yes,
Okay.
it's all set.
So confirming that all abutters have been properly notified, Paul Saulnier is the presenting engineer. Paul, why don't you present the plan, and if you will, use this microphone when you do. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Good evening, everyone.
Hi.
The subject tonight is 35 Stony Brook Road. It is an existing 4-bedroom residence. The septic system failed a Title V inspection, so I was asked to design a replacement for that. The existing system is behind the house, excuse me, in this approximate area. So we did soil testing just below it in sort of a semi-wooded area. The testing was done in August, and again, there's no proposed increase in flow, so we're asking for variances from the Sherborn Rules and Regulations for which we have no choice but to ask. For instance, the first one we're requesting is from Section 5.2, which limits the design perk rate for septic systems in Sherborn to 20 minutes per inch. Perk rate on this particular site was 25 minutes per inch. Therefore, we've exceeded the maximum allowable. And then 7.1 is no longer required, as I understand. So the other variance we're requesting is from Section 8.2, which says that you need at least 5 feet of natural grade above the seasonal high groundwater and the soil absorption system to be located in an area where groundwater is at least 5 feet below grade. This requirement cannot be met anywhere on the property outside of the well protection zone and wetland offsets. So those two requirements are such that we cannot meet. So we're here tonight to ask for variances from those two.
And what offset was met?
Well, here's the radius for the well. We're probably 100 and almost 200 feet from the well, and the wetlands are way out down below, so
Okay.
off the property, as a matter of fact.
And the wells.
Abutting wells.
There were no abutting wells within 200 feet.
The wells upgrade from,
The well is upgrade, uphill, yeah.
And number of feet to groundwater beneath the system?
In that particular case, groundwater, I've kept the septic system designed 5 feet above the seasonal high groundwater, which is a Sherborn requirement, but existing groundwater was in the vicinity of 32 inches below grade, seasonal high. So we, towards the back end of the system, we actually end up with a mound 5 feet high in order to meet all the design requirements.
And site limitations for why that spot was selected?
Well,
Besides the setbacks from the wells, but I'm just curious, there's that edge of the property.
as you go
in
further
that
down,
direction.
these are where the wetlands are.
Okay,
It's also more heavily wooded, so I believe we're going to take out the least number of trees by doing it here. In fact, it's a 14-inch oak and a rather large 48-inch pine. But pines are always a problem in backyards anyway.
okay, so there was no reason to assume that soils would be better
No,
anywhere
not as you
else, or
get to the wetlands,
conditions?
they're going to be
Okay.
worse.
Okay. I don't have any other questions at the moment.
Chris, you have any questions?
no other question?
Mark, your comments on the plan?
Just a couple notes. One, the soil testing, I know, Paul, you might have skipped, it was June 30th that we did the testing, 2014. You probably put the plan together in August, that's why. The plan provides for an effluent filter, which will help to eliminate any particulate matter from going into the field. The soil testing is distributed throughout the leaching area, and as well as the groundwater was determined by soil morphology. It wasn't adjusted in any way because we were able to find what we call models or reduction oxidation staining. So that's how it was determined.
Okay, noting the date of the testing, let's also note that the testing was out of the normal testing season, which is permitted for replacement systems. It doesn't require a variance, but someone might say, oh, wait a minute, that's outside the testing season. That's the testing season for new construction. There is no limit on testing season for failed systems, which this is. With that, the board has reviewed the plan. The engineer has presented the plan. Are there any public questions or comments? Oh, come on. I've got to fill another 25 minutes. We're going to have a recess for
All
sure.
right, then I will mention that, as with many variance hearings, we're looking at replacement systems. This is going to be clearly an improvement over what's there now, and that's part of the reason for some of the variances, including, as Peter was mentioning earlier, it would not be appropriate to really deny use of a house by not allowing some sort of system to go in. So we try to look for the least number of variances, and the ones that are there need to be justified, and I think Paul has done that. So It's a little background there. I used up 35
Yeah, I know,
seconds.
Are there any other questions or comments about this plan?
I have a question out there.
This might be for the engineer.
I can't see.
The
Yes.
layperson that doesn't understand a new or a repair system. Is there a difference in the design on this particular site if this was a new system?
If this were, the questions come through the chair, but the fact is that the design is the same except for the variances allowed because the system couldn't be designed to meet all the conditions of the regulations. That's the change. All other parameters still meet the regulations. Does that answer your question, or was?
Not quite.
Let's try
In an
again.
engineering term, this particular site, is there a difference in the system as it's designed to fit into the regulations as a new or replacement system?
Yeah, there is a difference. The difference is the variance that were granted because it couldn't meet new construction standards. Answer another way, please. Take a microphone. Wait, take a microphone.
The other way to answer that is if this were a clear site, the house were not on the site, under the Sherborn rules and regulations, you could not build a home and a septic system on the site. I think that's the difference. The physical design, construction, and the design requirements wouldn't change, but if the house were not here, this lot would remain a vacant site.
Or the house might have been sited in a different place if where the house currently is had conditions that could have supported a septic system, and then you would have rearranged the layout. But given the current layout with the house and the well, which also has its zone that needs to be protected, then that starts to limit the areas that you can work in. So it may or may not have been buildable. We won't know that because the whole property wasn't tested, but it wouldn't, configured as it is, it would have been difficult, so.
Exactly what I was looking for.
Mr. Taylor.
Distance to groundwater, is that a variance too that would not be allowed in new construction?
There was no variance to the distance to groundwater. The variance that is being asked for has not yet been granted. The variance that is being asked for is that it not be naturally occurring material to create the distance to groundwater. They are still creating 5 feet of distance to groundwater. However, they are doing it using structured fill. I think that covers it. I will declare this variance hearing closed, and I will ask the agent, is the plan ready for approval?
I
You
would hope-
haven't voted
can
on
you-
the variances
Yeah.
yet. You haven't
Variances.
Oh, we didn't
voted.
vote the variances. Okay. Sorry about
Close
that.
it.
You know, I'm usually better about that. Okay.
Spend more time this way.
Yeah. Do I have a motion to approve a variance to section 5.2 to allow the soil absorption system to be designed on a perk rate of 25 minutes per inch versus the 20 minutes per inch allowed by this section?
So moved.
Second.
Moved and second. Is there any further discussion?
Just, if I may, based on both requests, the site constraints warrant both waivers, in my view, to be approved by the board.
Thank you. Okay. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Do I have a motion to grant a variance to section 8.0.2, which requires at least 5 feet of natural grade above high groundwater, and that this soil absorption system will be located in an area where groundwater is, and the soil system be at least 5 feet above, where groundwater is at least 5 feet below grade. This requirement cannot be met on the site, and the relief is to the requirement for natural grade above groundwater.
So moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 All right, that's approved. Is there anything else to come before this hearing? Okay, now I'll declare the hearing closed.
There you go.
And as the agent, is the plan ready for approval?
Yes, it is.
Do you hear a motion to approve the plan as presented with the variances?
So moved.
Second that.
Moved and seconded?
And so no
Discussion.
conditions?
The condition is that the deed recording is required prior to the plans being released, but the plans are ready for approval.
The deed recording is for what?
The garbage disposal.
Oh, okay, it does have a garbage disposal. Okay.
A request to not have a garbage disposal,
Right,
so it was
okay.
designed without one.
So the motion is to approve the plan, but not release the plan until receipt of deed recording regarding the garbage disposal. Do I have such a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Is there any further discussion? Yes.
Um, The owner of this property, his brother, is actually still here. I had informed him earlier in the process that a deed recording would be required. He went ahead and did it prior to this hearing, and I know that's earlier, because normally you like the...
Did he put the date of the hearing on the deed recording, or?
No. Renee, you remember, you had all this done, remember? And I don't know that you did a date of the hearing.
Because there's a section for it on there.
Yeah.
Is it blank?
Did they say tonight?
Yeah, that part of it's blank. Did you record this, or didn't you?
No.
Oh, you didn't record it? Oh, okay, sorry. So we'll just
Okay.
get all this information.
Right, it's back to you.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, it's just ready for review.
Yeah. All right, sorry.
Okay.
Any further discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Approved.
Good, thank you very much.
Okay, because this is being televised, the person working the television is going to be upset with me because we have no further business until a scheduled hearing of the regulation changes at 8:30. So until 8:30, we will be in recess. We will reconvene at 8:30.
I can go sign it. I can go get the plans.
Welcome back to the Board of Health meeting of September 17th. This is the 8:30 hearing on proposed regulation changes to sewage disposal and domestic water supply regulations for the town of Sherborn. I will read the legal notice. I don't know why I didn't have it right. I had it in front of me a minute ago. Here we go.
Do you want this copy?
The Board of Health of the Town of Sherborn, Commonwealth, Massachusetts, acting under the authority of Chapter 111, Section 31 of the Massachusetts General Laws and amendments and additions thereto, and by any other power thereto enabling, will hold a public hearing on Wednesday, September 17, 2014, at 8:30 p.m. in the second-floor meeting room of the Town Hall at 19 Washington Street, Sherborn, Massachusetts, regarding proposed changes to the Sherborn Board of Health Regulations, number 1, sewage disposal, and 2, domestic water supply. The following is a summary of the proposed changes. The complete text of the changes was available at Town Hall prior to this meeting, and I believe it was also available online. I will not read all the changes now. I will read them one by one as we go through them. I will tell you that several of them are mostly administrative. You'll probably recognize the ones that have more impact when we get to them. I certainly will make you well aware of them. But the first item is Regulation 1, Section 1.3, approved plan. This is simply to correct a grammatical error in the way it's written. It talks about no less than 2 members of the board voting for approval is required, and it should say no fewer. However, we're amending that to being a majority of the Board of Health members shall be required for a positive vote. And that basically covers us whether there be 3, 4, or 5 members, any future change, so that would never have to be looked at again. So I'd ask for a motion to approve change to the Regulation 1, Section 1.3, approved plan, correcting the grammatical error and putting in the new wording. Why don't I have that? Here's the new wording, okay. It shall then read, no permit shall be issued until approved plan has been signed by a majority of the members of the Board of Health following a vote at a regular meeting. Do I have a so moved?
So moved.
And second.
It's been moved and seconded. Is there any discussion? Yes.
Mr. Chairman.
Would you please identify yourself for the
I was
board?
about to. Ken Fitzpatrick.
Thank you, Ken.
41 North Main Street. I guess the only question, I'm not questioning the grammatical change, but I guess I'm questioning this paragraph, why this couldn't be reviewed and approved by the agent as opposed to having to have a hearing of so many members.
The Massachusetts general laws specifically to septic regulations, anything in the septic regulations since 1995 when the new Title V came out, if you change a septic regulation, you must have a public hearing. There are many other things. In fact, the water supply regulations that we're proposing changes to, the board could do in any regular meeting. We're including them in this public meeting because public comment is always valued when we're making a change. Those changes didn't require a hearing. This change, because it is part of a septic regulation under state Title V regulations, we must have a public hearing for something as mundane as this change.
You may have misinterpreted my question.
Okay.
I was asking specific to this section 1.3, the approved plans.
I think he's asking
What?
why the agent, why it even needs to be signed by members of the
You're
board.
asking why the board must sign approved plans, why the board must approve a plan rather than the agent?
Yeah, well, I'm saying, why couldn't we have the agent review and approve the plans, including minor variances? I'm just thinking about ways of expediting, approval process.
I appreciate that. It's the way the regulations are written. I am aware that in other towns, the agent is given more authority. However, you have an elected board here of town representatives. The agent would not always be a town member or a town representative, and it is a different way of doing it, but it's the way it's done here, and it's been proven to be most effective. It typically doesn't delay things by an awful lot, but yes. You're,
Peggy Novak, Mason Hill Road.
I'm sorry?
Peggy Novak, Mason Hill Road.
Thank you, Peggy.
Just a sort of a procedural question. Are these regulations considered parts of the bylaw, and do they have to be voted on at town meeting to be changed, or are they regulations that can be changed by the Board
These are
of Health?
these are regulations of the Board of Health, and under Mass General Law, the Board of Health regulations are made and administered by the Board of Health, not the town meeting, not town bylaws. They are separate, and the authority rests with the board to make and approve changes. Again, in this instance with septic, after a public hearing.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions on this first really mundane one, because they're going to get better? Okay. The motion's been made and seconded. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Aye. That one's approved. Item 2, Regulation 1, sewage disposal, adding the requirement that the licensed installer participate in a pre-construction conference with the health agent. This is already a condition when the disposal works installer's permit is issued. This is basically putting into the regulations a practice which is absolutely universal. Every time we have a system, the installer must meet with the engineer. basically, it's a heads up to the installer, the applicant, and everybody else that this is going to be a requirement. It's simply changing something from an administrative requirement that comes later to making sure that everybody knows it in advance. So the actual language would be, the disposal works installer with a current disposal works installer permit issued by the Board of Health shall participate in a pre-construction conference with the health agent and the design engineer if necessary prior to the start of any work. That's the new language to be added. Mr. Kleen.
John William on Bowden Street. If necessary, who? The engineer or the Board of Health agent, or if the whole thing is if necessary?
If necessary, is to the discretion of the agent.
So you may not have to have this meeting.
Most probably not. Are there any other questions on this one? If not, do you hear a motion to approve the changed language to section 3.2?
So moved.
And second
That's
that.
moved and seconded. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in
Oh,
favor?
well, I was
Sorry.
actually going to make
Okay.
a comment. So, it's not uncommon to have this sort of requirement, and in fact, I was reading something recently, another town had a requirement for 4 meetings prior to work being conducted. And we've also seen that things tend to go more smoothly when there are communications with the agent. It takes care of a lot of problems before they might occur. And when that communication doesn't happen, sometimes things get a bit off track, and it does cause some of the delays that people have mentioned are a concern. So this is a way to address that. So,
Mr. Chair, if I may?
Agent?
On the actual verbiage, the reason why it says, "and the design engineer if necessary," and that's inclusive of that statement, is that sometimes the installers have already spoken to the engineer. So that's where the "if necessary" comes from. It's not saying that the pre-construction is not necessary. It's saying if the engineer has already done pre-construction with the installer, then sometimes it's not necessary. Because we
Okay.
can communicate through
Thank
each
you.
other.
Thank you for the clarification.
You're welcome.
Moved and seconded. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Aye. It's approved. Item 3, Regulation 1, sewage disposal, amending the first 2 sentences of Section 4.0B for plan submittal to delete the requirement that applications be filed in duplicate. And that is simply the removal of language. Do you hear a motion to approve the removal of that language? Because we really no longer require it to be in duplicate, the permit just has to be, we just need a single copy.
Nobody ever submits it in
Oh,
duplicate
yeah, and we
anyway.
never get it in duplicate anyway, so,
If I need a duplicate, I can make a copy.
yeah, we can make a copy of a permit. It's not as if it's a whole entire plan. And it's just, again, as I mentioned, some of these are administrative and fairly inconsequential, and this is one of those. Do you hear a motion to approve the change to this Regulation 1 sewage disposal, Section 4.0B?
So moved.
Second that.
Moved and seconded.
So do we see what it's going to say? or-
Yeah, the final language is the application for a well and for a subsurface sewage disposal permit, plan submittal,
Shall be on such form.
shall be on such form and in such detail as the Board of Health shall prescribe and shall be submitted with the required fees, da-da-da-da-da-da. The language being removed is shall be filed in duplicate,
Period, they.
period, they, yeah. Are there enough copies out there of these changes that everybody can see one? Okay. So it's been moved and seconded. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. It's approved. Item 4, Regulation 1 sewage disposal, amending sections 5.1B and C to correct the soil application deadline to follow standard practice and to specify the requirements for deep hole observation wells. Excuse me. This is soil testing requirements under section 5.1B, and we're at the final sentence of B where the current language is applications for such testing during the groundwater season, so should be submitted prior to April 1st. And the change being made is that prior to is removed and honor before April 1st is added. The prior to was confusing, and they have been accepted to April 1st. We went through enough arguments with people over prior to and on the 1st, that we moved it to the 1st, so that we're trying to kill some of those arguments. When we're told that the application season is from so-and-so to April 1st, we want to make sure April 1st is included. That is all that's happening here, folks. So I'd ask for a motion to approve the changed language on that section.
Do we want to vote separately on C?
Yeah, we'll do separately on
Okay,
C.
all right, then so moved.
And second
Moved
that.
and seconded. I can't believe there's any conversation on this one. Please? Thank you. Yes, sir.
Ken Fitzpatrick. I guess the question I have is, Title V doesn't have any calendar requirements. It allows testing throughout the year. And this Section B, your April date, I know it's just a grammatical change from prior to as opposed to on. But I think I'm more questioning the fact why we even have a window from November to May, or whatever it's referenced in another section that's not listed here under B. But why wouldn't we conform to Title V state standards as opposed to having any limited calendar dates on or before? And is it possible to raise a motion from the audience or are we only voting on these specific items that are?
The only thing we can vote on is what's here. It's been public notice for 2 weeks, et cetera, et cetera. We can't make changes to the changes that are proposed. We can have future hearings to make other changes, but, and I appreciate your interest in making that kind of a modification, but we're limited by the language that we put here.
No, I appreciate that. Maybe I don't know if it's worth even having a discussion about that or noting it for.
It probably is a worthwhile discussion at a future time. We weren't prepared to undertake that change this time. We're trying to make, from my perspective, we're trying to make small changes that are beneficial to the community at large without making overwhelming changes. That one would be a large change. I could ask the agent to respond to why we do not allow testing in that drier season. Would you, please?
I'd be glad to. Actually, the season was March and April at one time. That is the time of year where you have your highest groundwater recordings. It can fluctuate one year to another, but historically it's your highest time when you look at the evaluations that have been done by soil scientists through the years. As well as a soil evaluator, we were taught the same thing. When Title V changed, and it changed in 1995, they realized there's 2 cycles within the period between November and the end of April. In those periods, basically you have a groundwater starts to become higher again, comes to where it may be at its highest point April, as I said, March and April, but there's another curve, November, December. And that's because the leaves are falling off the trees. You don't have that trans-evaporation cycle going on where the moisture leaves from your vegetation. So it's very difficult to determine groundwater outside of your high groundwater season. And as a soil evaluator, we were taught that's why we choose that season. Very difficult to find models, very difficult to determine groundwater unless a large excavator can get very deep, because if we can't find models, we need to try to adjust. And adjustments get very difficult to determine outside of that groundwater season, I should say. So that would be my response to your question.
Well, let me just respond to his response then. So that's suggesting that the data is good on April 1st, but it wouldn't be good on October 30th? So, I mean, I have if Title V does not have...
October 30th is an allowed testing time. I'm sorry, November 1st. I'm sorry, my mistake. October 30th isn't, November 1st is, yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think there's an inherent problem in the specifying dates, where, again, the state standard doesn't have that. So I know a lot of our regulations have been on the books for, a long time, and a lot of it have not been grounded in science. And I think that we're making incremental changes here, but I think it should be noted, for maybe future discussions that, you know, there's more digging that needs to go into some of these rig changes.
Right. I would point out that, as Mark noted, that used to be just March and April. It was several years back expanded to November 1st through April 1st. And with application through April 1st, testing through the end of the month. But that, you know, it certainly is something that can be looked at in the future.
And I think Mark also mentioned not only the scientific basis for that, but also the practicality and the, how deep of a hole can you achieve on a site with equipment that's, you could reasonably expect to get, and what the costs are associated with that. So there are reasons behind why it would be at this, limited to the higher water periods, and also the state is a minimum, right? So it's the least stringent of things. It's the broadest applicability across the state, so.
I would also point out, for a failed system, there is no testing limit. There's no season limit for the testing for a failed system.
But for new construction or renovation, there is.
For new construction or for a non-failed system where it's a voluntary expansion, yes, there is a testing season. In the front.
I was going to say something, but you just answered it.
Okay, in the back.
Hi, Susan Taylor. So therefore, if you miss the deadline, you don't get it in by April 1st, you now have to wait until November?
For new construction, yes,
For new
you must
construction or
plan, yeah, you must
renovations
plan your
inside.
testing season and.
And hasn't the state done scientific testing that has shown that you can do this year-round, provided that the ground is not frozen?
I think this would be a valuable discussion if we were considering expanding the testing season, but that's not what this section does, and that's not what's on the agenda. I believe it's certainly grist for the mill at a future project.
Future agenda?
At a future agenda and a future regulation change plan, certainly is, yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. So, looking to make a one-day change. Do we yet have a motion?
I can't recall.
Yes, you do.
Okay, we have a motion and second. Barring any further discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 That one's approved. Second piece of this is the details of the observation well being added to the regulations so that there's no question about how the observation well, let me back up. When you do a deep hole, you take your excavator out there, you dig anything from a 10 to a 15 to 18-foot hole if you've got a really big machine, and you want to be able to tell where the water, you know, if water comes in at a later time, you want to be able to measure it, but you can't leave the hole open. So we require that you leave a monitor pipe in the well. This section basically specifies how that monitor pipe is to be installed such that it preserves its integrity and is usable over a period of years as you want to be, if you want to be using it to check the water levels and qualify your site. So the language being added is at the end of item C, and it is that the observation well consists of a 4-inch Schedule 40 PVC pipe. The observation well section placed within the deep observation test hole shall be perforated and wrapped with filter material or backfilled with crushed stone and sand, etc., which will not allow fine soil materials, silts and clays, from clogging the well. Again, the intention of this is that when you go to all the effort of digging that deep hole and putting in an observation well, we want that well to be able to be maintained and be able to be tested. If it fills up with silt, you're getting bad readings or no readings, and this basically preserves the integrity of that for a longer period of time. Do I hear a motion to approve the added language to section C?
So moved.
And second.
Moved and seconded. Discussion.
Scott, now, if you put stone around the pipe, you're going to attract water to it, so isn't that counterproductive? You know, if you put stone in a hole and you put the pipe around it, that's going to draw water into it. So doesn't that skew it? Are you requiring stone in there?
No, no, you can use filter fabric or stone or sand or anything else to keep out the fine particles. Filter fabric is fine. It's basically demonstrating that we want to have the integrity of the well maintained, not simply put a piece of perforated pipe in there and backfill it.
You already do that already, though, don't you, Mike?
What we don't see, what we have is sometimes clogged pipes. So this if you have sand or gravel, you don't have to do anything but put the pipe in the ground. But if you don't have that naturally occurring at the site, sometimes what we find is the silt will get into the pipes and we don't get a true reading. Stone could work, but you're correct, Scott. We would have to wait for it to stabilize. Stone is used a lot in the United States Geological Survey wells that we use for comparison. The reason for it is it does allow for a filtration mechanism, but filter fabric works just as easily. And these aren't like a USGS well. They may be used for a year, but some people like to go back and check wells, so it gives the longevity to the monitor pipe.
Could I ask, though, your question begs the issue, do you see this as a burden?
I think it's hard to say, but where I saw the stone in there, I was worried that, if you have stone in the ground, that attracts the water. And
Yeah, it's if or, I mean, it's not nailing it down. Okay.
I don't expect many people to use stone. I expect filter fabric.
Tom Ermston, a detail just on language. Why not say at the end of it, which will prevent, rather than not allow? Just it's English usage, I think would be clearer and better.
Makes sense.
I find that that's within the body of the proposal. How does the board feel about it?
It sounds fine. That makes it clearer.
I believe it is clearer. Do you hear a motion to amend the motion to change not allow to the word prevent?
So moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Do you hear a vote on the amendment? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. And further discussion on the main, yes?
Just, again, maybe for future meetings, it's not addressed in what you proposed here, but for section 5.1c, I just wanted to be noted maybe for the minutes again, that you're calling for 3 to 5 test pits, but Title V only requires 1 to 2. So if we are going to contemplate future amendments, that would be something else to be considered.
Thank you.
I want to make one other comment. Over some period of time, you're concerned about whether water would be drawn to the stones, so to speak. Over time, you're not going to have underground, if you did a slice, the ability for water to just be rising up in a column, and also the well itself is going to be more of a draw than the stones, because, right, that's a more open space. So I don't think the stones are going to change the dynamic that much. It is more, as mentioned, just to try to have a way to prevent it from clogging. Right. And the clogging would actually lead to more problematic readings than the stone, I believe. So.
Any further comments? Hearing none, we will vote the main motion. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Aye. It's approved. Item 5, amending section 5.2 to increase the maximum allowable percolation rate from 20 minutes per inch to 40 minutes per inch. Without reading all the way through it, what happens is in the regulation, the word 20 is changed to 40. And it starts to have quite implications beyond that. The leaching area size chart then includes additional percolation rates above the 20 to show the allowable percolation rates as recorded in Title V for a field. In other words, it affects Section 7.1 also in the area, the leaching area size. You can understand you might understand as the perk rate gets higher, if it's harder and harder to get the water to go into the soil, the leaching field has to be larger. That is, the absorption rate is slower, and you need a larger area to do it. So once we suggest changing the perk rate, we also then must increase the leaching size of the leaching area.
Mr. Chair, if I can, just on the actual chart, I spoke, it was unfortunate, I didn't see the columns the way I should have been seeing them, but it's a technicality. As you look at the 25 to 40 minute per inch rate, the numbers that you see for the loading rates, which is the .34033, and it keeps going down, you just need those need to be shifted to the next two columns. In Title V, you don't have a Class 1 soil with a 25 to 40 minute per inch rate. It's a technicality, so everything shifts one column to the right, and that would meet the chart requirement. I'm not, it's a technicality.
Well, it's more than a technicality, but do people with these sheets understand what that change is? That is that the bold loading rates at the bottom all go one line to the right. There is no loading rate for sidewall and bottom areas in Class 1 soils, so those are all dashes. The chart then makes more sense. Actually, I'd have to entertain a motion to an amendment to the written proposal to move those loading rates. Do I hear such an amendment?
So moved.
Yep, second.
Moved and second. Any discussion? Yes, sir.
Aren't you about 3 items ahead on your vote right now? So you need to start with section 5.2 before you go to the chart.
We'll go back.
Yeah, but the fact is that this is, it's all one and parcel,
It's
changing
integral.
changing the perk rate.
You gonna take it as one vote?
I believe it's, oh, okay, I see. Yeah, thank you for that. I'm inclined to take it as one vote because it's all one issue.
They're connected.
And they're connected, so yes, I guess let me read through all the sections that are affected by this change. Well, see, section 7.1, that's A is a different item. Section 7, is this item 7 or section?
Item 7 is section 7.1B.
Yeah, but it's connected to item 5. So we're going to do item 5 and 7 together. Is that clear to everybody, that they're totally tied? Okay. In changing the allowable perk rate, we must change the leaching area. We must change the leaching absorption table, which is the item 7. If it's clearer, I'll separate them again. They're going to be separated. You have a sheet that goes in order, I'll go in order. So the simplest change here is the percolation rate changing from 20 to 40 with the change of 2 numbers in section 5.2. Do I have a motion? Motion, and then we'll discuss
I
it.
have a question. Why is the present rate not sufficient?
Again, I'm going to have a motion put on the table, we'll then discuss it.
Yeah, we're not going to vote right away.
We're not voting it yet. Okay, do I have a motion to change from 20 to 40 in section 5.2?
So moved.
No, second that.
Moved and seconded. Now we can have some discussion. So,
Well, why is the present rate of 20 not sufficient? It's been sufficient for all these years. Why would we need to actually, what would be the reason for it? What would be the benefit to anybody from doing this?
You didn't identify
State
yourself.
rates of 60 minutes, 60 minutes.
yeah, let me be clear.
Okay.
The state allows up to a percolation rate of 60 minutes per inch. The state used to allow up to 30 minutes per inch and had a conditional 60 minutes. In their experience since instituting their new regulations in 1995, they found that they have more than enough success even at 60 minutes per inch. It's a very, very dense soil, a very, very slow perk rate, and a very, very large leaching field at that rate. However, the state does allow up to 60 minutes an inch. We've been staying at 20 minutes an inch for decades, and what it has created is several unbuildable sites in town, basically diminishing the values of those properties. But more than that, when variances are sought, when people are coming in for variances, sometimes the only variance they need is a change, as a relief from 20 minutes an inch to 25, as the variance hearing that happened just here tonight. Their variance was from 20 to 25 minutes an inch. They had to go through an entire public notification, hearing, butter notification, and everything else for that variance, simply for that rate change. So we believe that, I believe, and the reason it's here is that we're proposing that a more reasonable rate is 40 minutes an inch. It takes the burden, takes the variance burden possibly off of people applying for replacement systems. It could bring some properties into a state buildable where in fact they weren't before, because 20 minutes is a fairly stiff standard.
This hasn't really been an issue in the past, why is it now?
It has been a serious issue in the past as far as,
Maybe for you.
it's certainly been an issue for people that have land that perks at 30 minutes an inch, and it's been an issue for people trying to put replacement systems in when they can't find something at 20 minutes an inch. It's a huge issue. Over here.
Manny Salakis, 60 Prospect Street. Within Title V, how many towns actually have private wells that allow the 60 minutes per inch?
You make wells and septics, you're saying?
Yeah, I mean, we have, it's 100% private water. So Title V goes to 60,
Yes.
and now we want to move to 40. So I guess my question is where's the scientific data that you've done, to move it to 40 from 20?
Frankly, the state requirement for making changes to the regulations, we must state scientific information if we're going to be more rigorous than Title V. This is not more rigorous than Title V. This is still more, it's more rigorous than Title V, but it's less rigorous than the current. All right, and so where we're reducing from the current rigor to 40, we're not required to show scientific information because the state has already determined that scientifically it's okay at 60.
I guess my question is, so you feel confident by going ahead and raising it to 40 that it's not going to have an impact on any of the wells?
Well, the well separation distance is already protected by Title V at the 100 feet and by our own well regulations that allow for 125 and faster perking soils up to 150 and downhill wells up to 175. So we've got much greater well protection than Title V. When you're trying to look at Title V wells versus septics, we're already creating that greater separation and that greater protection that Title V requires. In the back.
Keisha Lipton, 175 Maple Street. There's another issue that is also a large problem associated with this that I like to bring up, which is people who own homes now who would like to expand them and room count and bedroom count as it relates to the size of the septic system. There are lots of houses in this town that are 4 bedrooms, say, that have a 3-bedroom septic. And that is not something that's usually understood at the time of purchase. And then when you decide you maybe want to add a room to your house, or even maybe you just want to expand a room that's already there, you find out that you can't do it because you have a 4-bedroom house, but you need a 4-bedroom septic and you only have a 3-bedroom septic. You cannot add 1 square foot to your house unless your septic system matches your room count. And there are people who are perfectly willing to put in a new septic system, a larger system, and they go and do a perk test, and the soil isn't perk, and they can't do it. So then they can't do anything to their house.
Including pay higher taxes,
Thank you.
which is what they essentially do.
Which, if they got the addition and paid higher taxes, we'd have more tax revenue.
Yeah.
It is possible to add more than 1 square foot. It's not no expansion at all. There are various guidelines and a flow chart that helps walk people through what's possible. That's something that the board spends a lot of time with people on periodically, is looking at the options of what they might be able to do with their property, given the constraints of either their existing system or what they would be able to put in. What kinds of changes to the house would trigger what sort of different requirements than maybe what they have there now. So it's not a complete prohibition on changes to your home.
Okay.
I'm certainly in favor of increasing this from 20 to 40, but I think it doesn't go far enough. Percolation rates of up to 120 minutes per inch have been documented to sustain soil absorption systems. The Title V limitation of 60 minutes per inch is sufficiently conservative to ensure that public health and safety are not adversely affected. therefore, it is appropriate that the Board of Health increase its maximum percolation rate to be more consistent with Title V regs. I'd like to see it go to 60, but if we're voting on 40, that's...
I went to the DEP a number of years ago and looked at the study that they used to base their decision to go to 60. And in reviewing that, I found that they had relied mostly, it was a paper research, it wasn't data. It was looking at what regulations other states and areas had. And the reference to 60 up to 120 is what they were seeing in other states. That may be the case, but when I went to one of the states to look at their regulations and read them in more depth, 120 was a rate that's used for a surface impoundment. So there are some states that, because of the conditions, maybe depth to groundwater, that I can't recall what the issues were, but the 120 perk rate was when you wanted to keep your septage at the surface so that it would degrade aerobically as opposed to under the ground. So that was a rate that would hold the water up there. So that's what, so whoever did the review for them really didn't look at the underlying details necessarily,
Yeah, I'm not
or completely.
I'm not advocating 120-minute perk rate. I'm advocating the state
Right, but
standard
when it's
of
used
60.
as an argument to say that, gee, if 120 is okay, then 60 should be
Well,
okay.
the
So
state standard is 60, and that's what I'm suggesting. that
And
we
then
should
the
be
state
leaning
standard, in my opinion, is a minimum. And I don't know if you know, but when regulations are formed, when environmental regulations are formed and at higher levels, you try to look for the least common denominator to some degree. So they need to consider towns that have a public water supply or are connected to the MWRA, but have homes in town that have septic systems. So they are looking to set something that's minimally acceptable for those kinds of circumstances. But here we have well and septic. And therefore, I think it's valid, and actually the Dover Board of Health also has in their septic regulations that the state is a minimum, but that's not appropriate to a town that has the conditions that we have. And then the other aspect that you can consider for the Title V regulations is that it's applying to areas that are much lesser developed than here, less densely so the western part of the state. So they're trying to set regulations that meet those conditions, and then it's up to a locality to look at its individual circumstances and decide what additional protections may be needed for the protection of health. And so that's why there can be those variances. On the issue of 60, what happens when you have a slower perk rate is that soils don't dry out very fast. And at a prior public hearing on this issue, I forget how many years ago, there was evidence brought up about survival of bacteria and viruses when soil is wet. So unless that has a chance to dry out, they will not die. So, and if you have wet soils and they stay wet and it connects to groundwater and it's been wet the whole time, then the bacteria and viruses are going to move in the groundwater. And it's the wetness that's going to allow them to survive. So that's part of my concern with a perk rate of 60.
Thank you. Mary Ann.
Mary Ann Clancy, I know we're not voting on, I know we're not voting on anything, but you're voting on 40 minutes. But in response to what Kat was talking about, I would also like to go on record as saying I'd like to see the town go to state standards. And in answer to your comment earlier, I believe, maybe I'm not correct, but I believe the town of Weston has well and septic, and I believe the town of Weston goes by state standards. And so maybe if you are going to consider that at some point in the future, you might want to look at the town of Weston and see how they've dealt with it.
Thank you.
Well, there are also a number of towns who are similar to Sherborn in this area in having well and septic. And again, this was a number of years ago that I looked at their regulations, and they all had provisions within their regulations different than what we have here. There's a wide variety of what people use as controls. For example, many towns have absolute prohibitions on cesspools. So the minute you learn that there's a cesspool, it has to be replaced with the septic. We don't have that. So there's just variations on that. It's not uncommon to deviate from Title V.
And then,
Peter, in connection with your review of the perk rate, has the board had any discussion on the groundwater distance as a companion parameter in this whole
it's
business?
coming up.
I'm sorry?
It's coming up.
Oh, tonight?
Yep.
Oh, okay.
Read the next one.
It's a little bit hidden, but, yeah, there is a later regulation, proposed change regulation that will essentially allow mounding for new construction, which is not currently allowed. In other words, where you can create the separation of groundwater. Separation would still, I'm jumping ahead, but to answer your question, separation would still be 5 feet, but you could create that if that regulation change happens tonight.
Just to reiterate what you just
Mr.
said
Clean.
about the state Title V, it does not take into account towns that have wells and septics. It was designed for towns like Natick that have septic with town water. You're
It
saying
may be
there is
because
not
when-
adequate protection for a town with both. That's what you just said?
When regulations are set at the federal and then the state level, the point is to try and address that lowest common denominator. You're not going to have more stringent requirements where they're not necessary. So they're trying to set that base that at least everyone is operating above that, and then as need be. For example,
At safe levels. They're not
at-
going to set standards that aren't.
So what you're saying is it's not safe enough for Sherborn, even though it does address wells and septics. It's safe enough for any town that only has septic.
safe is a question.
That's what you're saying.
It is complicated, and it depends somewhat on your perception of risk. And also, the studies are few and far between when it comes to evaluating these things precisely. So, and I've searched for that kind of information. For example, perk rates, slower perk rates, so clay soils, something that might be closer to 60 minutes per inch, may physically trap bacteria more readily. But some of the places that I've seen that talked about as that's an advantage are also places that have the groundwater at much greater depth than we see here. So it's physically trapping, but then there's still opportunity for drying or for whatever else, or there are just other factors. There's so much variability across the country and even across the state that can affect that. And so it's science, but it's somewhat art. And again, without drilling a hole everywhere and testing everywhere that not everyone does, it's difficult to evaluate. So how precautionary
I'll take
would you
two
like to
more
be with health?
comments on this. In the back, Sarah?
Sarah Ready, 4th Street. I'm curious, this may be a question you can't answer, but these 40Bs are popping up with some regularity in town. Do our current regulations, perk rate and some of the other regulations you're addressing tonight, force people's hands to that kind of a project? Or is that something that they would have done anyway, because that's just a different development that they were looking at?
I'd like to be the first to respond to that, because I believe it's not a technical response, it's an opinion. And so you'll find opinions varying on that. It is fact that if a property cannot meet the regulations, that a 40B allows them to develop without meeting the regulations, and I think that's the fact you're getting at. So the natural consequence of that fact would seem to say that, yes, strict regulations, if somebody's intent on developing and finds they can develop with a 40B but cannot develop in meeting the regulations, they're obliged to maximize the value of their property using a 40B. And as you well know, in those instances, we lose control. But, you know, that's, I guess I'd have to, again, I'm carefully crafting that as an opinion, because some people wouldn't think that's a bad thing. They consider that, you know, well, we can always fight a 40B, and maybe win, or what else. But to answer your question, strict regulations make some people use a 40B to be able to develop the best their asset to the highest and best use. I said I'd take one more, and okay, I'll take more than one more. Here you go.
Peggy Novak. This afternoon, late this afternoon, someone brought to my attention a study which I did not read totally because it was 98 pages long and fairly technical, but it raised the issue of some investigations that are finding other types of things beyond the bacteria produced by sewage in groundwater as a result of it not being filtered out sufficiently via septic systems. And there are things that are left from medical things, medications, and household chemicals. So I would have some concern with, in the change in the perk rate, allowing those things to remain. They found that some things dissipate quickly and some things are held within the groundwater for a lengthier period of time and long enough to leach into groundwater and well water levels.
Let me point out, with this change, those elements, if they're coming from the household, will take a lot longer to reach the groundwater. We're increasing the perk rate, meaning the flow through the soil is much slower. So, in other words, it's not like it's going through sand and just going whoosh right down to the groundwater. So you're getting a longer detention period with a higher perk rate. So your argument that doesn't quite.
Well, I was thinking about what
Well, you're talking about, under
saying.
wetted soils for viruses and bacteria,
Right.
that's another matter entirely. But as far as contaminants.
Right, so I'll say that I agree with Peter on that, and that a perk rate of 40, to me, isn't necessarily bad. And I would maybe see that as better than a perk rate of 2, which we allow. So we don't have a lot of latitude to start shifting our window. Part of my concern with the 40, even though I think technically maybe okay, for reasons of the retention, and it doesn't go as far as soils that are going to remain wet for a long period of time and then promote the other problems I mentioned earlier. What I'm concerned about is that some years ago, and I'm not sure what it was in connection with, and let's see if I could find, but basically there was town council opinion that we need a lot of technical backup to go to something that's not Title V purely. So we are essentially grandfathered in with 20, but to go to 40 may mean just going to 60, that there's not an in-between part. 60, from the studies I've looked at, does not seem appropriate to me for the bacteria and virus issue. 40, I might be okay with, but I think we're at great risk without further advice, guidance to understand, is a vote for 40 a vote for 60? And that's one of my concerns, and again, that's based on legal counsel advice on that.
Now I will try to limit it to 2 more, and that's over here and all the way in the back that hasn't spoken yet. You're first.
It seems apparent from what's been discussed so far that even at 20, you can get a variance to something more than 20. I haven't heard there's been a real logjam of denials of variances when you need to get beyond 20. And considering that there's apparently a lot of uncertainty about, just how far you can go with this and why this might be a better idea than what we're already doing, I would say at this point it would be best to just rely on the variances to handle anything in the way of a requirement over 20 rather than actually put it in as 40, which, as Darla pointed out, could easily go down to 60, which is probably not what most people here are thinking of having happen. Certainly for the last 35 years that I've been in this town, 20 seems to have been a good place to at least start, and from that to seek a variance. but I don't know about going 40 automatically would say that. I don't know on that.
Thank you. And in the back.
Yes, I was wondering why...
Your name, please?
Sophie Cannon, 216 Farm Road. I was wondering why there couldn't be more scientific study done with this. Not sure what the proper authority would be that we could assign and get some independent consultant to study this a little more before we go ahead and
Yeah, the science was
vote.
all done at 60 minutes an inch and
Well, not
found
for-
satisfactory.
Not for the town like ours with septic and well water.
Again,
Or maybe a
point-
town like Natick or...
Thank you for your
So,
comment.
we're talking apples and oranges here.
Thank you.
I live here because it's a pristine town, because the water is clean, not because I want it developed.
Thank
If
you.
I wanted that, I would live in Wellesley, which I have.
Okay. I'm going to bring the conversation back to the board. Chris, do you have any comment?
Yeah, I don't think we ought to limit if anyone else wants to
Oh,
speak.
everyone's spoken at least what? Okay, here we go, one more.
I think in relation to the 40B, that's totally what they're pushing everybody to do, is to go to 40B, because you're not allowing the 40 or 60-minute perks. It forces everybody's hand to go 40B, and that's why we got that disaster on Whitney Street. It should have been a nice little subdivision, 6, 7 houses. Now we got, what, 40, 50 units going in down there?
48.
48. There you go, beautiful.
With 48 wells.
I mean, is that what we want? Is that what we want our farm to be?
Well, no place.
Harley Kaplan, Maple Street. I have a question. The question is, can you have different regulations for existing construction as for new construction? For example, new construction can go 20, 40. Existing construction after 5 years can be 40, 60. Can that be
No.
possible?
We don't. I don't know anybody that does that. I mean, you said a perk rate, you grant variances for hardship for existing homes. That's how we deal with a different rate.
I just want to follow up on that. Can that be voted on a town meeting by the
No.
residents?
No, these Board of Health regulations are under a totally separate legislative enactment. They don't go through town meeting. They go through this hearing and a vote of the board. And we're trying to take some small steps to align, I believe that's what we're trying to do here, is to align the regulations to the benefit of the residents who are trying to do additions to their houses, who are, having to go through various hearings that are delaying them by months, that they maybe don't have to.
There is a way to do that. You would just simply change the regulations, but he's talking more about a master plan of some sort that would...
No, I'm talking about having the people vote on whether or not we want 40, 20, or 60.
It's not, that's not the way the legislation has been set up.
That's what I mean to do.
Sarah?
Well, Sarah Rangi, Daryl brought up a good point about now we have 20 and this is fixed. If we open up 40, then legally that, may open the door to people saying, well, if you have 40, whatever. I understand that point, but I guess my question would be, has the board or any member of the board had legal action brought before them as a result of our regulations being so stringent?
You mean have people threaten to sue the board?
Yeah, I mean...
Yeah, they've threatened to sue, but they've found other ways to proceed. And we were sued once, and the trial ended mid-trial when some other irregularities arose, and nothing ever came of it. I personally sat in the witness box for an hour saying not a word while they argued whether or not I could say a word, and then decided that the case shouldn't be there, so.
Did our town council represent you?
Oh, yeah, we had representation.
Okay, I just...
It didn't cost much, it ended quickly. All the way in the back.
I haven't had a chance to speak on this one yet. I support the 40, go to 60, but I support the 40.
Thank you.
Well...
Could I ask, could this be the last one? Please. We have a lot to get through here, folks. Yeah.
I wonder if the board has a figure on how many wells in town have failed due to being within close proximity of either a cesspool or a septic that had a variance.
You struck on one of my favorite comments that I get to make. Every single well in town is a private well. we have absolutely no information on private wells after they're installed and approved. They become private. They become the responsibility of the homeowner. The testing, the record keeping, everything about the well becomes private, and there are no records in town of, how many wells have failed because of proximity to septic. Basically, that would show up in a really bad water test. Awful lot of people don't do water tests regularly, and frankly, I haven't heard of any that show up due to septage infiltration, because we keep a pretty good distance between wells and septics, and as I say, we keep greater distance even than Title V.
Except for one exception, the downtown and all the public water supplies that you do have data on.
The
Which-
public
most
waters
of which are within the
Yeah, the water supplies
protected
that we do,
area.
yeah, the water supplies that we do have information on, I've never seen any of those that have shown any contamination due to septic or sewage. What we see is that we have road salt on Main Street that seems to have a pretty good effect on wells in the center of town.
Actually, the nitrogen compounds are related to septic. So the reason that we're seeing those levels in those wells is because of what's coming out of leaching fields. So that's why it's there. So it may not be above a permissible level, but that is a sign that it's related, that what's coming out of the septic systems is getting into the water. And this is, again, where it gets very hard if you don't have the data, and it's all very location-specific. For example, in Colorado, I forget which city, they were looking at the effect of septic systems on wells there, and they were finding connections even 200 and 300 feet away. So we don't have that kind of separation between our systems all the time, right? Our standards are for less than that. I don't know what the soils are there, what the other dynamics are, the speed at which the groundwater flows. It's a really hard thing to figure out because it's underground, it's out of sight, it's complicated. And again, it goes back to how precautionary does one want to be. And there is a connection that we see it, that we see salt in wells. Obviously, it's coming from the surface. Well, the septic system is a little bit below the surface, but same thing is happening.
I will take comments from people who I have not yet heard from, and one is over there.
Eric Johnson, 20 Snow Street. Do you have an idea of the last, I don't know, it would be 20 years perhaps, on how many perk tests have failed 20 but would have passed 40?
The clearest indication we have of that is variance hearings that are required when people have a failed system or looking to expand their house. And I will tell you that the vast majority of variance hearings are requesting perk rate relief, that they cannot meet the perk rate. I know that my own property could not meet the current perk rate. I know from the soil characteristics through town that, there are vast swaths of the town that could not meet the current perk rate that were built in the 65 to 75, 1965, 75, vast numbers of homes that couldn't meet the current perk rate. All right, and as a consequence are really curtailed from putting on additions or doing any major improvement to the home.
Because your soil was
Because the
too slow.
soil is too slow, yeah, it can't meet 20 minutes.
I guess the information I'm kind of specific for is the new homes, the new development. Is there an idea as to, what this would impact new development? That's kind of what I'm roundabout kind of getting to. So is there a perk test to look at that, again, would have failed 20 but passed 40, kind of in that window?
If you're asking, how many lots in town would now qualify for construction that didn't in the past, we have not done a study. I do know that the assessors have granted, great relief to properties that have shown that they can't perk and they have high water table, and therefore they're no longer assessed as buildable land. But, what that number is, no, we have not done a study. And anybody else I haven't heard from? Okay, thank you. We have a simple thing on section 5.2, a motion to change the number 20 to the number 40. All those in favor signify.
I'd like to say one more.
Please do.
One more
I
thing.
don't think we've spoken.
Oh, well, I thought, I thought you were going to go first. Okay, fine.
I defer. ahead.
No, go ahead.
Just
Oh, all right. So I was going to
if
say,
you repeat you.
I think I would like to see further investigation into 40 and more from the perspective of, and I don't know what it would take, working with DEP or something to identify whether 40 would end up being challenged, or is that something that we could support? Because I have a hard time voting in a way that makes me feel like I'm voting for 60 without knowing that we could hold to 40 or to 30 if we decide that's the right number or what have you. But I think that would take having a better understanding of the legal implications.
Yeah, and I think we've had some, in prior public hearings, 05 and 06, there were some legal opinions on that we could go back and look at. I don't think it was ever resolved completely, but whether specifically what you said earlier, which was, is a vote for 40 or vote for 60, just because unless you have a preponderance of evidence that there's a difference, then would it end up sliding to 60? I don't know. Or if there's some question of it, does it revert back to the original 20? And I saw an opinion in that regard, too. Once there becomes a question or contention or legal action, then it goes back to the 20 that was prior. So I've seen a statement both ways legally. I have no idea.
I believe that if we go to 40, we can defend 40, that that town council will defend 40, and that if we require someone to sue us to change that, and that is not an easy process. It's a long process and an expensive process, and frankly, it's a lot cheaper for them to do a 40B than to sue us. So I believe there's certainly sufficient standing at 40 that we can defend 40, and that 40 would not be attacked. I think there'd be very little reason to attack it because it's going to be an improvement for pretty much everybody.
I tend to agree with that. The way boards of health make rules and regs, generally, it's left to the expertise of the boards as having more information in general than general public. That's not always the case, but I think the courts generally defer on that Mass General Laws, Section 31. That's been the history. Looking at the science on this, I look back at the minutes Ellen provided from 06. Again, it was how much it's factually based, I can't tell you. I can read some of the scientific statements that were made at that time. But again, we're talking about people's opinions and comments. And, one comment back then in 06 was that the soil is a highly porous soil in town. Well, of course, that depends. If you're in Peter's lot, then it's not highly porous. It's a shale or kind of a hard pan or what have you.
Thanks for that.
Is it not? I think that's what you said earlier, but not so many words.
It's hard-packed glacial till, as a matter of fact.
Glacial till, thank you. Also, there was a scientific statement that said obviously, there's a high water table in a lot of areas. Some of the other scientific statements were some of what Daryl got into with the virus being deactivated once it gets out of the wet areas of the leaching field. A Woodard and Kern study, they do a lot with wastewater treatment, was added in there. Didn't say anything definitive. There was also a statement from in fact, Daryl made it, from a Rappaport Institute study of eastern Massachusetts, where there were, out of 187 cities and towns in eastern Mass, of course there's 351 in the entire state, 109 had local regulations more stringent than Title V, and 11 other towns had a 20-minute per inch percolation rate. Again, this is from 06. Out of the 187 that were looked at in eastern Mass, 109 had more stringent than Title V, and 11 had the 20
And that's from where? I mean,
06.
yeah, no, I mean, what's the source of the data?
Source of the data is a Rappaport Institute Kennedy School of Government, Harvard University study that Daryl referenced. So she may have some input.
The combination of private septic and private well.
Restate what?
How many of those have, of the 187, have the combination that we do of private septic and private well versus septic and town water supply?
In the eastern part of the state, not many. I don't know the exact number. It's very hard to find out.
I'd like to keep the conversation up here for now.
Well,
I
it's
mean, we have a lot to
relevant.
get
It's
through.
relevant, and I think it's variable. I mean, you have cities that have sewer serve a certain percentage of the town, but then once you get to the outer reaches, they just don't run the sewer, or it just stops. So then it becomes a septic kind of issue. There was also, no, that one wasn't too scientific. So I'm trying to review anything that's scientifically based that is rather than opinion or based on growth and development or non-growth and development, and weigh that as part of this discussion.
Thank you. Are we ready to vote? Are you ready to vote?
Ready?
Motion's been made to change number 20 to 40 in section 5.2. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay.
Nay.
Excuse me, this is a three-person vote, it is not a public vote. This is, okay, maybe I didn't make it clear. The vote is only by the board. That's the way the legislation was set up, following the public hearing and receipt of comments. What we have is a 2-to-1 vote. It is a majority. It is approved.
Does anyone on the board there have an interest in selling or buying real estate?
I'm a licensed realtor, if that's what you're getting at, because you knew that.
The reason I asked this question
Conflict of interest then, isn't it?
The reason I asked this question.
No,
is
not at all.
Not at all, no, so not a conflict of interest. Huh, excuse me,
It would appear to be a conflict of interest.
very clear.
Because quite frankly, when you change the rate from 20 to 40, you are encouraging the buying and selling of real estate, which you would not otherwise be able to encourage.
I do not believe I'm encouraging the buying and selling of real estate, and the fact is, any actions we take here affect every single person in the room and every single person in the town equally. I see.
But we're not voting on it, you guys are.
I understand that, but the fact is that it still affects every single person in the town and to everyone's advantage or disadvantage.
I think you leave yourself open to a potential conflict of interest.
Well, you know, the conflict of interest statute, you may report me to the state Board of Ethics, and I have consulted the State Board of Ethics and have done every single thing necessary by the State Board of Ethics to allow myself to continue on the Board of Health. I recuse myself on any active real estate in town, any property that's for sale, any property that has not yet closed, any property that's offered for sale. I am not active on this board. Those regulations and those changes that are not changes, but those provisions that I make to be able to continue to active have been determined to be sufficient for me to avoid conflict of interest as a realtor. I will tell you that this regulation change doesn't even benefit me personally because 40 doesn't even come close to my problem. So, you know, if you really think I have a conflict of interest, yeah, if I had a perk rate on my property between 20 and 40, you might see a benefit. But even there, this regulation change is to the benefit of everyone in town, not just any one individual. So, you're welcome to talk to the State Ethics Commission and lodge a complaint.
Peter?
Yes.
May I say something to answer that, too? I happen to be, my name is Mary Ann Clancy, I happen to be a realtor in town. I grew up in town, I was born here, I've lived here almost my entire life, and I find that comment rather insulting. I am very much in favor of raising the rate, and I think Peter answered for himself. But my reason for wanting to see it raised is because I think it's time that the town allows people that move here the opportunity to add on to their houses. As you said, I think it's time for the town to allow some new construction so we can keep our tax rolls intact. I can promise you, passing this is not going to be the reason why I have my next meal. I can well afford to live in this town, whether this is passed or not. I think it's for the better good of the community. And I think it's safe. I would like to see it go to 60 minutes, but I think that to insinuate that certain people have this desire to make money off of this is very unfair and unreasonable.
I'm going to go on to the next item, which is item 6, Regulation 1, sewage disposal, amending the timing requirement for the submission of garbage grinder deed restrictions to match the regulations with current practice. This is section 7.1. It shows up under 7.1A, strangely, but if the residential leaching area has not been designed with sufficient capacity to accommodate a garbage grinder, proof of a deed restriction shall be required prior to release of the approved plan. The current language is issuance of a certificate of compliance. And the difference is that we need the deed recording before the system is installed, because our experience has been that sometimes the system gets installed, we withhold a certificate of compliance, but they've got an operating system, they hook up to it, they hook the house up to it, they sell the house, we never get the deed recording, they never get a certificate of compliance, and basically this is an administrative change such that we are assured the deed recording is in place before they even build the system. It's what we actually just did on the variance hearing that came before this meeting at 8 o'clock. So this is, again, a fairly simple administrative change with not much consequence, except that we get assured that the systems are installed properly and that all the legal niceties are addressed. So I ask for a motion to approve the language change to section 7.1A to remove the words issuance of a certificate of compliance and add the words release of the approved plan.
So moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Ask for public comment. Mr. Khalid.
Why do we have a deed restriction requirement?
We have a deed restriction requirement because we used to not even allow garbage grinders on the system at all. And the state says that if you have a garbage grinder, you must increase the capacity of the system by 50% to have a garbage grinder. We have a deed recording requirement such that the owner knows that there is a garbage grinder restriction and they cannot put one on. As properties change hands, the only way to notify the new owner that they can't have a garbage grinder is in fact to have it on the deed. It's discoverable at the time of property transfer. And so we require the deed recording because we're not requiring the 50% increase, but because of that, they may not have a garbage grinder. It's a matter of balancing the size of the system to the septic load that it's going to see. Yes? Sarah Raggi.
Sarah Raggi, thank you. I forgot. I'm a little confused. So would people currently that have systems without garbage grinders and therefore not the additional stuff, then be required to register it on
No.
the deed, or that's their grandfathered in?
No, this is just for new plans.
Okay. Okay.
No, we don't have a septic police out there looking in your kitchen grinder and...
I was wondering.
No septic police. Unless and until your system overflows, fails on the surface, smells, and your neighbor complains. There are no septic police. Any other questions on this one?
Although it's not a great idea to have a garbage grinder and a septic system because it causes materials to go out that are undigested, they float, they tend to float out then into your leaching field and clog it up, and it doesn't degrade the same way. So if you want to preserve...
50% bigger.
Yeah, again, the 50% bigger is because you have a garbage grinder, but it's still not recommended. It's bad for your system. Your system is looking to work on pre-digested material, if I can put it that way, not undigested. Or post-digested, I guess, material. Sorry, post-digested. A little humor, thank you. This doesn't really bode much conversation, I trust. Good. Questions from the board?
No.
No. This is going to make our life easier. Thank you very much. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Aye. Item 7, regulation sewage disposal, amending the chart in section 7.1B to accommodate the increase to the maximum allowable percolation rate from 20 minutes to 40 minutes per inch. This is a natural consequence of our prior vote. It simply draws in the Title V septic loading rate. It frankly is not even necessary that we do this because it would revert to the Title V chart regardless, but it makes the whole regulation more comprehensive. You can find the information in one place. So I'd ask for a motion to approve the change to the leaching area size loading rate to add rates of 25, 30, and 40 minutes per inch.
So moved.
Second.
Moved and second. Is there any discussion on this? In the back. Susan Tyler.
Susan Tyler, sorry.
Right.
As Mark Oro mentioned earlier, on the columns shifting to the right on that.
Yes, the
motion?
columns are shifted to the right
Thank you.
to match Title V's loading rates.
They're called long-term acceptance rates, if you want the exact.
Thank you. Long-term acceptance rates. Any further discussion on this? Hearing none. Any questions from the board? All those in favor of changing the chart signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed?
I'm going to abstain.
Abstain. Abstention. Vote is 2 in favor, 1 abstention. It passes. Regulation 1, sewage disposal, amending section 8.02 to remove the requirement that states a subsurface sewage disposal system shall be constructed with a maximum groundwater level of 5 feet or less below natural surface grade. Okay. Shall not be constructed when the maximum groundwater level is 5 feet or less below natural surface grade. This is actually tending toward another regulation change, which I may have alluded to earlier, where the regulations require 5 feet of naturally occurring material above groundwater. And the next regulation, that regulation change will allow mounded systems for new construction, which are not currently allowed for additions, expansions of systems and new construction. You can only have a mounded system, that is, artificially create the separation to groundwater for a variance with a repair. All right, our regulations require naturally occurring soil. So, despite the fact that this comes first, it's part and parcel of the idea that we would allow mounded systems for new construction, which are currently not allowed. And that is, you create the distance to groundwater with carefully structured, state-approved septic fill, which has a grain size and a gravel mixture specified by the state. So, but the first way it shows up is basically in saying here that the groundwater must be 5 feet below the existing grade. Obviously, if you're going to create a mound, you can get away from that 5 feet, even if it's 3 feet below grade. So, a positive vote on this would presume a positive vote on the next item coming up, which does not require naturally occurring soil for all that separation to groundwater. This seems like an innocuous one, but in fact it's the trigger one that for the whole concept of that change to the regulation. So we find language here that there's a removal of the parts of the regulation in 8.02. You'll find the italicized words are to be removed, or when the maximum groundwater level is 5 feet or less below natural grade surface. In other words, it would not be permitted. And it goes on to say 5 feet of pervious material determined by percolation test in natural soil is going to be removed. So you take those two together, and this change would permit mounded systems for new construction in state-specified constructed fill of septic gravel. I think that's about as full an explanation. Does everybody understand what I'm saying and what that means? Mr. Khalil?
That's almost indicating you're going to perk test the soil you're bringing in.
The soil has to be certified by the state as having a certain rate, yes.
You're determined by percolation test.
You do a sieve
That's of the fill.
Yeah, or a sieve analysis. That's a state regulation on the fill material. For a purpose of discussion, do I have a motion to approve the removal of that language in section 8.02?
So moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Discussion. Over here?
What would be put in place of natural soil, a natural soil?
No, as I explained, when there's a mounded system, the state specifies the characteristics of the septic gravel that must be used. It specifies how many, have the size of the fines and the coarse material and so forth, and it has to be a certain blend such that there's still a filtration through that material. How it's laid is specified, that it's laid in level layers and compacted so that you get, in fact, a filter bed built up of the specified septic gravel, which takes the place of the natural soil that was not high enough.
Although there is,
Yeah, natural soil is a bad thing?
no, there, all right, so my opinion, and from what I have read, natural soils are generally viewed as being better at cleaning water. There's more interaction, there's variety, the way it was laid down, whatever the dynamics are. And the fill that's approved by the state and would need to be used in this case is what's also required to be put under pipes that are laid for a septic system. So the sewer gravel is designed really, in that case, required to be laid under the pipes that have holes, and that's what the water comes out of, to move the water away from the pipes so that things don't grow and clog up the pipes. But to me, that's saying that that same dynamic is going to mean that you're not going to have the interaction with the soil, the growth of the biomat and the biological agents that are going to help degrade things that are in the wastewater. And so I don't see it as comparable to natural soil. And this one I see as a compromise on the protection of health. By having that sort of material brought in, and I don't know if this is an area where the DEP has ever considered allowing things that are soils and that are not these special sewer gravel mixes, that, again, their design is to move things away. And when I look at guidebooks from universities and other research organizations at what a mounded system would look like, they don't have the same design specs to use this for the entire mound, but still to limit it to a certain layer underneath the pipes and then have other kinds of soil. So I have some trouble with what the state would then require for that fill. We wouldn't be able to specify another kind of soil.
Saying leaving as it is the better choice.
That is for protection of health. This one, I think, opens up possibilities for far more contaminants reaching the groundwater.
And I would point out that I have a different view of the cleansing mechanism that's going on than Darrell observes, because in fact, what you also find is that there is a biomass developing on all the soil grains of this fill. That is, it is a faster perking material than natural soil, but much like the gravel in a leaching trench, all right, you get a biomass development on the grains, all right, and you get the effluent flowing over those grains, and that is the treatment mechanism that's going on after it gets past the stone in the trench. So it's not that you're losing all that treatment, it's that you're getting a different form of treatment than a strict filtration through fine-grained soils. You're still eventually reaching a fine-grained soil in this instance, and I don't have the same reservations that Ms. Beardsley has. In the back.
Yes, Mr. Tyler, just a commentary. I've dealt with a lot of artificial things in my site, in my life. We got artificial wood, we got artificial flavoring, we got artificial... What in God's name is artificial soil? I mean, do we have artificial gravel? Gravel is gravel, and if it's approved by the state, I think it's good enough for Sherborn.
Mr. Khalid.
When we dug the highway garage a couple of years ago, you know what they did? They pulled out of there? Hundreds of yards of sewer gravel. That's what it is. My house is sitting on it. I could sell it. It's not, it didn't get made in the factory. The glaciers left it in one part of Sherborn and didn't leave it in the other part of Sherborn.
Thank you.
And that would also not be a good thing to put a septic system on, because you're not having that dynamic of the interaction of the wastewater and its constituents with soil. There's not a lot of reaction going on with stone, purely stone.
Scott Mayo, I'm an installer. Every septic system we do, 99% of them, we bring this gravel in to do it. So how can it not? I don't see how you can say it doesn't work. It works. It's not made soil, it's just soil brought from another place to the site. And the soil is always better 90% of the time than what's already in the ground. It's better, we're using it all the time. I don't...
Better, but how are you defining better?
Because a lot of times when we do the excavations, the soil's junk, it's clay, it's till, it's silt. You bring that gravel in there, that's your filter system to get down to that soil.
Well, but that, whether it's clay would be addressed by perk rates and other things. There are a lot of different dynamics, and the ability to just move water quickly away from the point at which you're discharging it is not necessarily the thing that you're looking for the entire
The system that goes in uses this soil. I mean, so you're saying it's not good, but we're doing it every day.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yes.
I think there might be some...
I'm sorry, your name, please?
Rebecca Honeywell.
Thank you.
I think there might be some confusion about the mechanisms that detoxify substances in the ground, because the process of moving water and controlling where water goes is done very well by stone. But stone doesn't bind materials that detoxify. That's a chemical reaction. Stone is a totally inert substance. So having water move quickly or away is completely different than the process that filters in a way that makes the water clean. So there's some confusion going on because we're talking about two different things, or multiple different things.
Right, there
And
are
like-
chemical reactions,
and like the last-
adsorption, absorption.
Like the last conversation that was happening, you know, we didn't really know why we were voting yes or no. There wasn't really science being discussed in the decision that was made. It's what's more convenient. I think that's what you're talking about. It's much more convenient for people to have a different state read, but if we're not really talking about how to make the water safe in the town, we're talking about how to make it easier to make an additional...
Again, I would point out that Darrell and I see two different mechanisms operating here. Darrell sees the water just rushing away from the pipe. I see biomass developing where, every bit of effluent is passing over each grain soil and having a biological reaction with that biomass and being further treated as it flows. So, you can have scientific arguments and this, that, and the other thing, but I would still refer to the fact that the state has great amount of history since 1995 changes and tremendous success allowing this for new construction, for repairs, and even for the replacement of unsuitable soils in existing in new systems. So it's going to be a matter of scientific argument and disagreement, if you will.
So I'm not for or against it at all. I'm just saying that, like, if you, in a town that has town water, the equipment that's processing the water has specific equipment that's used to detoxify the water to make it safe to drink. We don't have any of that, so we have to rely on the soil to do that. So if the soil doesn't have the properties to do it or whatever, that's what we're talking about.
If you're experiencing toxins, they're from your own system, then you shouldn't be putting them in there.
Okay, but that's not really, that's not, I mean, that's a very simple way to look at it, but the reality is, it doesn't matter because the Board of Health's job is to help people to have safe water, and if you pour vinegar down the sink, you know, there needs to be a way for a chemical reaction to take place so that the next day, the water that comes through the faucet out of the well is safe to drink. You know, so like,
Right,
so I think we're getting confused.
we have treatment requirements and dimensional separations to accomplish that. In the back.
Michael Lesser, 54 Forest Street. I agree with what Rebecca was saying before, but I guess there's some level of issues. The argument before that if something's good enough for the state, it's good enough for us, is a nice point to make, but the state was set as minimum standards. And that's something we can easily decide whether we need more protection than what are the minimum standards that are set in other parts of the state where there's less development density and where there's maybe not the same sort of combination of wells and septic. So the argument that's good enough for the state is good enough for us. I don't think it's applicable here. We can decide that that's not the basis necessarily for us to make a decision. The science, some of the other points, the science, Peter, you have your idea of what science is, but fine, I agree, there's probably some growth on the gravel, and there's probably some biological action going on there, but that's part of it, but there's much more action going on in irregular natural soils. And you can say that's science, but if you read literature, you don't find the literature saying that that gravel is as good as natural soils. You can say it, but it's not necessarily what the literature would say about what gives you the most treatment and help in terms of cleansing the septic. So that you could say it's science versus science, but just saying it doesn't make it science, or it doesn't make it better or good enough for what we need in this town, given where the fact that we can make a decision that we want to have a little more cleansing and more protective and more action going on between the bottom of the septic. To say that we put in the gravel every time, we do put in the gravel every time, but right, we have great depth groundwater with natural soils to deal with that. We have perk stuff that goes on. So even the argument, just because we do it everywhere, therefore it's fine to do it here, doesn't hold water either. So I think that these are not scientific arguments, the fact that we do it every time, or that you get a little bit of cleansing action from gravel. So I think that the town can decide, and it's not just that we should obviously just do the state minimum is applicable to here. And that's not necessarily what the science would say if we wanted to get more protection, which is what it's based on. Because I resent before the comment that, I mean, it's nice to challenge to say that we're doing things for everybody in town, but their purpose is the Board of Health, is to deal with public health issues. It's not to deal with the other stuff, even though I'd like to make it easier for people to do things.
Holly Captain, Maple Street. How thick is this layer of gravel that surrounds the pipes?
It depends on the amount of naturally occurring soil above the groundwater. In other words, you're trying to create a 5-foot separation, so if you have 2 feet of naturally occurring soil above the groundwater, it's 3 feet deep. If you have 3 feet, it's 2 feet deep. If you have 4 feet, it's 1 foot deep. So it's the amount required to create separation to groundwater. I'm sorry, I had a thought. You're right. It's right to say that the Board of Health is here to protect the health of the town. And I would tell you one case in which we very clearly had absolutely no chance to do that, and it's right down there on Whitney Street, where they have a sewage treatment plant. They have a sewage treatment plant with a groundwater discharge permit where the waste from 48 houses is being apparently, potentially treated to a tertiary treatment plant and then redeposited right next to, 8 or 10 of those houses. So we have no control of that, and that really gives me pause. We have no control of even advising the people in those houses that their wells are only 65 feet apart, all right? We have no control at all. And that gives me pause. And so, when you might suggest that I'm saying, well, I'm looking for development at this, that, or the other thing, actually, no, I'm looking to make sure that we don't repeat or we have as few situations as possible where we lose complete control of a system because they've easily bypassed all of our regulations. So there are a lot of forces here acting, not simply one saying, oh, we got to have development. No, we really need to regain control and try to make sure there aren't projects where we have no control.
And I don't...
That wasn't my main point. It was about the science.
I know it was about the science, but I'm trying to point out that we're still the actions that we take are safe. They are not endangering. That sometimes it's a question of if a car is going to get you around town, and if a little Honda Civic is going to get you around town, do you need a Cadillac Escalade to drive around town? It's a matter of degree, and it's a matter of perspective of risk assessment, I suppose, or how much protection is necessary. We could just require 6 feet of naturally occurring material, and that would be better. So why haven't we done that? The state says 4 is enough, and it's striking a balance, is all I can say.
The state is a minimum, and it's not necessarily to be applied to the whole entire state.
Thank you.
You keep saying that that's as if that's sufficient science.
No, I'm not saying it's
there's a lot
sufficient
of
science.
towns-
I'm saying
there's
it's a
many
sufficient
towns that have
experience.
more.
It's sufficient experience with the regulations that they work.
Yes, but many towns
Yes,
have more.
Mr. Fitzpatrick.
Yeah, I think that this amendment is good science, because I don't think it's an argument of natural soil versus gravel. I think it's natural soil versus materials that could improve your septic design and absorption and all the scientific matters behind that. I mean, I actually had Peter Veheman, who's a professor at UMass, who's one of the architects of Title V, come out to my property here in Sherborn several years ago. Mark and Paul were both there. And his comment was, who is to say, he thought Sherborn's regs were ridiculous, because he said it's not founded in science. He said that who's to say that the material that exists there, that God put there, is better than what we can bring in to create a better system. And so to me, this is all about good science. It's not about gravel versus what's there. It's about what you can bring in.
Any more public comments before I bring it up to the board exclusively? None. Chris, do you have any comments?
Yeah, I have a few. So again, trying to, as Rebecca pointed out, trying to focus in on the science here, because that's really what it's about. It's not about 40Bs and non-40Bs. And there was a study done in '07 with some statements regarding vertical separation from groundwater, and it talked about biomat. And the biomat thickness depends upon effluent quality, and no appreciable biomat formation is expected with pretreatment of effluent. As the biomat thickness grows, it extends upwards into the aggregate, not typically down into the unsaturated zone. The unsaturated zone thickness is not expected to change over the lifetime of the system. And then down below, just a few more sentences. Deeper unsaturated zones do not demonstrate additional levels of treatment. In this one opinion, the additional 1 foot of separation provided in the Sherborn regulations do not produce any value with respect to the public health and safety, and there was no technical basis for this requirement. However, getting to Rebecca's point, which is the key point, is where is the chemical reaction occurring? It's occurring more in the natural soils, I would argue, and it seems as though bringing in a mounded system is something different. So here's a statement from a couple of years back that a percolation through a fill does not provide the same high level of filtering and biological and chemical treatment as percolating through naturally occurring undisturbed soils. And I guess that's where I sit with this question. Clearly, there's a better processing, and I definitely would lean on the side of safer water supply, especially with the unique characteristics of Sherborn on this particular question.
I'll just note, picking up a little bit on what Chris said, that biomat is one thing, and chemical interactions and adsorption and absorption, which are two forms of sorption, will take place differently with soils. And there was something else I was going to mention. Oh, and I agree that this is not something that I think we can directly to equate to stopping 40Bs. It's a matter of health to consider, and I just think we can't connect those two necessarily and know that one is going to have the other outcome. I think that's all additional I had to say. Oh, except, again, the use of this sewer gravel in places. Again, it may be places where there isn't a public sewer system. People need to have septic. Sometimes it's in very dense urban areas, but they have a water supply. So you're going to allow these other ways to at least remove the septage from the home and reinfiltrate it into the ground and what have you, but you don't have the same sensitivity, perhaps, of having drinking water wells in the area.
You ready to vote? Ready to vote?
Yes.
Motion's been made to remove the wording as noted in section 8.02. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Nay?
Nay.
You can only vote once. You voted aye.
I did, and I'm asking
I voted
I'm asking
nay.
people that
I'm
are
nay.
opposed to vote nay.
Nay.
Okay.
Nay.
2-1, and the change fails. Item 9, sewage disposal, amending section 10.1 to add a new section D to reduce the required offset distance from a septic system with a higher degree of treatment as offered by a secondary treatment unit approved by the Massachusetts Department of Environmental Protection to a well to the offset distance required by Title V. This is a citizen-requested change. A couple of years back, the Board of Health made a regulation change such that a private well may not be located closer than 20 feet to a driveway. Seemed like a reasonable thing to do, gave protection to the wellhead, couldn't get run over by a car going wild. But we have had a couple of instances, I'm sorry, wrong one.
Okay.
So this is getting late. This was an initial request of a citizen who has a piece of land on the border of which a neighbor has erected a septic system, and this septic system has a higher degree of treatment. It's a fast system. It has it's a higher degree of treatment as required, as allowed by the state for a reduction in leaching field area and distance to groundwater. But the simple fact is the effluent from this septic system has a higher degree of treatment. It's less strong, if you could call it that, than a regular septic system. And so this person approached the board and said, well, you know, where this leachate isn't as strong, do we still have to have this, 125, 150-foot separation to a future well that I might want to have on my property? And we gave thought to that and said, well, it makes sense that you wouldn't need the greater distance. How much relief should we grant? And we felt that, well, if there is a less strong effluent and it's still going through a treatment plant system, a septic system that's been approved and meets our regulations, that the separation distance required by Title V, as opposed to that required by Sherborn regulations, would be a reasonable compromise. It sounds a little bit complicated, but the fact is that this person, in trying to use the adjacent lot, basically gets 25 feet of more usable area where he might put his well and then be able to offset that well from his own septic system, et cetera. So it's not something that would come up often, but it was a citizen request that seemed worthy of discussion, and it's part of this hearing. So I would ask for a motion to approve the wording, where, I guess that's just a whole new section. It's just a section as I read it.
No,
No?
next
It's
page.
next page,
Item D.
Thank you. Item D. That's the new section. Where the septic system's effluent has a higher degree of treatment as offered by a secondary treatment unit approved by the Massachusetts Department of Environmental Protection, the offset distance to a well may be reduced to the offset distance requirements of Title V. Do I have a motion to approve that change to the regulations?
So moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Is there any conversation from the audience? Yes.
I just have a question. What are the requirements of Title V? That's
Title V is 100 feet.
100, okay.
Yes.
Jeff Walker. My only question is, and I'm not out of position on this, is would that secondary treatment system require maintenance? So could there be a condition in the future where that landowner no longer inject chemicals or changes filters or does whatever is required to maintain it so it could degrade that system?
Yeah, it's not a secondary treatment system, it's an alternative system, but it does require maintenance. It has moving parts, and it typically has to be, I think, Mark, it's inspected and certified for a couple of years before the state releases it?
Well, the Board of Health would be the governing body that would consider releasing any requirements of the innovative alternative technology, which we now call secondary treatment units.
Right, but we don't release those requirements. That's what our...
We're going to be asked to relieve those requirements for a system coming down the road. We just saw one come in. So there may be some consideration if relief was given to a distance, such as a well, that the board may have to now consider, do you allow any relief on that type of situation that's being noted here? You might want to add some verbiage that no relief can be allowed to the maintenance requirements. That's
what the agent's referring to is when a higher level treatment system is approved to go in, it does have to be monitored and reported for a period of time. When its operation has been proven over that period of time, the applicant can apply for relief from the testing and engineering survey required. In other words, a third-party reporting. And that's usually granted. Basically, it demonstrates that the system's operating properly and he knows how to operate it. So your question is apropos, because after that period, after that relief is granted, and it is typically granted, there is no longer any assurance that that adjacent system is operating perfectly.
Could change hands, change owners. It also seems like this is so rare that it might be better keeping the regulation as it is and making this just be a request for approval for specific variants, because you're not doing it as often as you are for the other variances.
It's okay. You misunderstand variances because there are very limited circumstances under which we can grant a variance. If this isn't approved, then we can't grant a variance for this adjacent landowner just because this guy has a higher level treatment system. All right, I mean,
because it's a new property, not because
it would be new construction. He's limited to the same, either 125, 150, 175, depending on whether he'll. Will is uphill, downhill, and gravel, and so forth. But the point is well taken.
I would like to say that actually this point and this issue about whether there's ongoing maintenance ties into some other concerns I have with this, which I like the general concept of this, but I think there are details that need to be worked out to specify the what-ifs and under what conditions. Because sometimes we're coupling these sorts of secondary treatment units with variances that are being granted on other things, so for repairs. And I don't think we have enough of that in here. I think it's too simplistic. So, although I like the idea, I think it needs more work. Probably enough more work that we're not going to figure out that language tonight.
We're not.
So, that's where I am on this. I thought it might cut to the chase on what I'm thinking.
Well, to that point, I had totally forgotten, and I'm glad Mark reminded us that in fact the monitoring and testing requirement goes away, and that is that is significant my way of thinking. But further comments, Sarah Reggie?
This is just a semantics. I don't know if it's important or not, but in the last sentence of to reduce to correct the distance requirements of Title V, that's 100 feet. Would it be worthy to put 100 feet in instead in case Title V changes for some reason?
Actually, that was intentional, just so that if it is a moving standard, that we just don't have to go and change the regulation. It was intentional that, that because there's higher treatment, we'd accept the state minimum. Doesn't look like it's going to pass. So. Chris?
Yeah, a couple of questions. Maybe Mark can address them. So when these higher treatment units are installed, my assumption is they work, but how are you going to know if they're not working, to Jeff's point?
Whoever installs one of these systems, I can answer two questions because I heard another one from the audience. The state requires that they continue to monitor the system. They have to have a contract with the provider who does the testing and monitoring of the system. If, for some reason, a change of ownership, or if they fail to do the review process by not paying the company, the company that they've contracted with needs to report them. Unfortunately, they would be reported both to the state and the local Board of Health. We've only had one instance where that happened. We sent a reminder letter and everything got back on track. But the state has a pretty tight process as it relates to testing these innovative alternative technologies, these secondary treatment units as we now call them. But it has occurred once that we saw, someone, I don't know if they forgot or whatever the case was, but there's mechanisms in place for notification to the authorities.
Well, that's very concerning, because it's great in theory, but probably not so much in practice. If someone if a company goes bankrupt, they're not going to follow through on this stuff. It seems, like Daryl's saying, it seems like there's a whole bigger world out there of review that needs to occur when we're talking about innovative and alternative technologies.
The other thing I'd like to mention is that some of the ones that we have seen used in town are targeting a particular constituent. So they're doing added treatment for nitrogen compound removal. They're not doing anything for some of the other materials that may be in discharges, and therefore, by allowing a different distance to a well, sure, you may not get the nitrates, but you'll be getting something else. So I think we need to consider that as well.
This clearly is not as simple and straightforward as we thought. So I would ask at this point that the board vote, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Opposed, nay?
Nay.
Nay. 3-0, not accepted. Item 10 is the same as the item that we already voted no on, and therefore I would suggest that we just vote it. Construction and fill regulation amending section 15.0A and 15.0B, construction and fill, removing the words "in naturally occurring soil." Do I have a motion to not approve the proposed changes to construction and fill?
Wait, right.
What?
No, I think we should just vote it.
Fine. Do I have a motion to approve the removal of "in
Correct.
natural soil" from section 15.0A and 15.0B?
So moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All those in
I'll
favor?
make one more comment.
Oh, please.
And I can't remember the exact section, but the Title V regulations do at some point in them refer to natural soil
They do.
being present and it being important for meeting the requirements. So there's acknowledgement in Title V that there's a preference for natural soils and an important role that they fulfill. Therefore, okay, I'm ready. Yeah. I knew there was something else I wanted to say earlier, and that was it, and I couldn't remember.
All those in favor signify by saying aye. Opposed, nay?
Nay.
Nay.
Nay. Defeated. It fails. Item 11. How many more do we have? Holy mackerel. Item 11,
We're
regulation sewage disposal, renaming section 21 to follow the new Title V terminology and incorporating that terminology into the language of the section. This is an administrative change because Title V no longer refers to innovative and alternative technologies. They refer to secondary treatment. The motion is to change in this section all locations where innovative and alternative technologies is referred to shall be changed to secondary treatment units.
And it looks like there's just one instance.
Well, title.
Oh, and the
and
title.
and the
All right,
bottom.
2 instances, okay.
Do I hear so moved?
So moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 We come to domestic water regulations, and as I pointed out at the beginning of this hearing, when there were many, many more people here, water regulations not required, for it to be changed, do not require a regulation, but this board feels that any changes to the regulations should have a public hearing, and we've taken the opportunity to use the required Title V hearing for septic changes to also address a couple of proposed well changes, minor well changes. So we go to item 12, adding a new section 6.0D1 to allow a well to be located no closer than 5 feet from a driveway when protected in a manner approved by the Board of Health, and adding a new subsection 6.0H to allow relief to the offset distances in the local regulations to Title V if adjacent septic systems have more highly treated effluent. We will take these separately because we've already killed the second one. So the first one is changing the language. Okay, actually we come to section 6.0, well location, and that change is item D. And D1, what is added, currently it says, when wells shall be located no less than 55 feet from the edge of the traveled way, 50 feet from the edge of the right-of-way, whichever is greater. Wells shall be located no less than 20 feet from a driveway. A subsection 1 is to be added. When protected in a manner approved by the Board of Health, the well may be located no closer than 5 feet from a driveway. Do I have a motion to approve that added language?
So moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded. I would point out, this was added because, as I alluded to a while back, the board added a requirement that wells couldn't be closer than 20 feet. And we've had a couple of instances where, due to offset distances to septic systems and houses and wells and streets and so forth, that it was almost impossible to do. In fact, it required a variance. And so we felt that, without going through a variance procedure and everything else, they could be 5 feet from a driveway if they're protected. That is, you put boulders in front of them, or you put a 10-foot high curb. But we didn't want to bother specifying what the protection would be. If someone wants to be closer than 20 feet, the intent of this section is they come to the board and we agree on, how they can protect their wellhead if it's between 5 and 20 feet from the driveway. The point is, it doesn't create a prohibition, it doesn't require a variance, it doesn't require anything more than just a friendly meeting with the board, but it does allow relief from the 20 feet. That's with the intent, I believe that's what it does. So, comments from the public?
You don't want snow plows hitting the wellhead,
We don't want snow plows hitting the wellhead either, yeah.
or drunken drivers.
You're in your own driveway. I'm sorry. Any more comments from the public, from the board?
No.
Chris? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Aye. And the second one, when an on-site or adjacent septic system's effluent has a higher degree of treatment as offered by secondary treatment units, the offset distances may be reduced to the offset distances requirements of Title V. Do I hear a motion to approve the addition of this section?
So moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded. This is the one that we just defeated, and therefore I don't think it bears any further discussion. I ask for a vote of the board. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Opposed, nay?
Nay.
Nay. 3-0. That item is not accepted. That is all the items coming before this hearing. I will take any other public comments before closing the hearing if they are pertinent. Hearing none, I hereby close this hearing, and thank you for your participation, those of you who are left. And all those who left also, with their participation. Thank you. Finding there's no more is there any more business to come before this board? Anybody have any items to add to the October 1st agenda that haven't already been added? If you do, let me know, I will, or let Ellen know, and they will be on the agenda, which is very full. This meeting is adjourned. Thank you.
I got to hit it. Jeez, you're throwing me off.